Hey guys. Here is part 3 of What If Naruto and Team 7 were actually trained by Kakashi. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 25. They arrive at the tower. Karen could not run fast enough. The Chunin exam had been a huge eye-opener for Karen. She and the rest of her team had passed the written exam well enough, her chakra sensing technique being precise enough to allow her to imitate the writing movements of those around her, and a simple tap code delivered by her pencil eraser made do for the other two. Then the 10th question happened, negating all of their hard work, and the exam went downhill from there. The forest was filled with deadly creatures. Her team had been ambushed, she still did not know from what or who, and she had fled into the forest, scattering as they had planned. But unlike the plan, the pressure never let up, and she never got a chance to get her bearings. When she managed to escape the ambush, she holed up in a hollow tree stump, only to find herself in the midst of a large spider web, with several spiders the size of her hand and almost certainly venomous jumping, not crawling, jumping at her. She had jumped herself, straight out of the stump and into the path of a rather large tiger. In fleeing the tiger, she took to the trees, only to discover that one of the local species of leeches actually lived at that height. And then, having jumped back to the ground as fast and as far as she could get, she had landed almost directly on top of a bear. "I'm a medic," ran the refrain in her mind as she jumped fallen logs and dove under low-hanging branches, skidding in the mud trying to escape the bear that was lumbering after her with the slow patience of a predator who knew they could outrun you, eventually. "I'm a medic," she thought, tossing a quick kunai at the bear and watching it hit with a light thump, barely nicking its thick skin. "I'm a medic, I'm a medic, I'm a medic." Then it happened. Her sandals skidded out from under her on the bed of leaves and mud she was crossing, and she fell face first into the dirt, skidding slightly until she fetched up against a tree. She grabbed her jaw with a whimper, worried it might be broken, until the shadow fell across her. She turned and stared. The bear was inches from her, its breath hot on her face, saliva dripping everywhere as it growled at her. It snapped once at her, then slid back, away from her face, as more and more orange-clad kids piled on and pushed. She watched the beast swipe one of the kids, smashing a kid so hard it vanished, but the others just shouted, and more continued to flow from the woodlands into the giant bear wrestling match. The bear continued to lash out, but with each blow, it grew more and more confused, put off by the lack of dead orange humans. "You have a scroll," said a dull, monotone voice beside her, very close beside her, and Karen jumped slightly in shock and turned to gape at the boy standing next to her, as if there was not a giant beast losing a wrestling match to a lot of identical boys only a few feet in front of him. He was wearing a white shirt, the collar pulled up to cover much of his face, and his sunglasses made it impossible to see if he was looking at the bear. Or her. "I know you have a scroll." "Why?" "Because I bugged you a day ago, or more appropriately, I bugged your scroll. My friend and I will save you from the bear, and help you find your team, if you give us the scroll." He turned his head slightly, clearly indicating that he was looking at her, and stared at her, motionless, as if he was perfectly content to remain in that pose until she answered. She could hear the bear sliding along the ground, pushed back by the tide of orange. She could hear the blondes shouting instructions and encouragement to themselves, status updates, tips on how to lift the creature's legs. But she could not lift her gaze to watch, enraptured as she was by that blank, patient stare. She felt her cheeks start to heat slightly under his scrutiny, but he did not react to her glow. "He's so cool." She fumbled with her belt pouch until she found the scroll and held it out to the boy, who took it gently, so gently, from her hand and looked it over. He then tucked it into a pocket and pointed to one side. "Your team is 10 minutes away, in that direction, hiding in a cave. My friend has guards around them, as well as some along the way to keep the local wildlife in check. Go now." She nodded and stood, ready to leap, but unwilling to leave without one thing, one very important thing. She turned back and faced the boy, her eyes wide, desperately fighting the blush on her face. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice quiet. The boy adjusted his glasses slightly, his eyebrows appearing above the frames for just a moment, and she swore his face turned a slight shade redder. "I am Aburame Shino," he said in the same dull tone. "And you have 12 minutes. Go now." Karen nodded once and jumped into the forest. She barely noticed a long line of blonde boys, no more than a dozen meters between each, that she followed to her team. She did not think on her close brush with death, or the fear of failure on the exam, or what her teammates would think about her trading the scroll away for protection. All she could think of was that boy. Sakura sat next to Ino's still form and watched the girl sleep. Sasuke had managed to get some rest, While he had a slight fever, and his eyes were still losing focus from time to time, he was at least mobile enough to get out of the forest with some help. Sakura knew very little on the human body, but he had no symptoms of illness beyond those two things, and his eyes were improving even as time went by. All in all, the group agreed he was lucky, very lucky, and everyone was glad to let it go until they got out of the forest. Everyone but Ino. Everyone had tried to talk to her. Shikamaru had tried to explain to her that the genjutsu she had been under was beyond the skills of anyone there, and had been designed to incapacitate people of their level. Lee had proclaimed that the trials of youth had no limits, and that she must rise to overcome. Even Sasuke had bit down on the chillier parts of his personality, and had explained, in no uncertain terms, that it was not her fault. In the end, nothing worked on her. She remained where she was, curled into a ball, refusing to eat or drink. Sakura was not a medic, but every shinobi was given basic survival training, and she knew the rule of 3. 3 minutes without air. 3 days without water. 3 weeks without food. Ino was on her second day without water, and that was not counting however long she had gone without before being captured. Shinobi tended to be a little more resilient than civilians, but if she was not already in severe pain, she would be soon. And still, she lay there. Sakura sighed to herself and looked at Shikamaru, who nodded from his post near the entrance. They'd had a talk, and Shikamaru had made a few suggestions to her. He had some ideas how to wake her up, but most of them would work best with Sakura, her best friend and greatest antagonist. He grunted and stood, stretching slightly, then walked out of the cave to join the others, leaving the two girls alone. Sakura pulled out a canteen, held it out, and casually dropped it on Ino's head. It hit with a solid thump, filled as it was with water, and Sakura heard Ino grunt. "I know you're busy trying to die and all," said Sakura casually, leaning back against the wall of the cave. "But we need to have a talk, and you need to have a drink." When Ino did not reply, Sakura leaned over and nudged her. "I got the okay from your team to incapacitate you and water you by force. Drink and talk or I will. No joke." Ino curled up further. Sakura took it as a stubborn refusal, and was preparing herself mentally to do just as she promised, but she heard the sound of Ino's voice, just on the edge of hearing. She leaned in quietly, and she heard it again. "I'm pathetic," the blonde girl whispered. Sakura nodded agreeably. "You are," she admitted cheerfully. Ino mumbled to herself, quiet enough that Sakura missed the words, but they didn't really matter. "No," she said clearly, her voice still sweet. "You are pathetic, but it's not because of that." Ino mumbled again, and Sakura nodded to herself, even if she could not hear the words anymore. "Nope, not that either. You're pathetic because of what you are doing here now, not yesterday." Ino froze, not ever breathing, then slowly pulled herself off of the dirt and turned to glare at Sakura, who gave her a cheerful wave. "Yes, it's me. Good old forehead giving you grief. Drink some water, and you can rant at me all you want. But not until you drink." Ino sagged slightly, then reached out with trembling hands and picked up the canteen. She brought it to her lips and sipped carefully at it, drinking slowly, giving her body time to adjust to the fluids. A few times she had to pause to settle her stomach, but she drank the full canteen eventually. She did not object when Sakura pulled out a second canteen and some ration bars for her to use. "Sasuke lost his clan as a kid. He does not talk about it much, and I don't blame him, but it must have been horrific. Naruto has no family, and I think he had very few friends and a lot of enemies while growing up. Lee can barely use chakra. Neji is Neji, he can't be that hung up on fate without something tragic from the past." Sakura shrugged and closed her eyes, resting against the cave wall. "And there's me, number 1 at being useless in the real world. You would not believe how I felt when it was pointed out to me how worthless I was as a shinobi. I take that back, you, of all people, might believe it now." "What changed?" asked Ino quietly, her voice rough from days of no water and no words. Sakura shrugged again, her shoulders scraping against the rock. "Same as the rest of them. I decided to do something about it. I found someone willing to teach me, several someones over time, and I worked and worked until it paid off. When you fall on your face, you have 2 choices. Pick yourself up or eat dirt." She smiled. "I found the taste of dirt unappealing, so I stood up and kept going." Ino and Sakura sat quietly, no sound but their quiet breathing and the occasional crinkle of a ration bar being unwrapped. Eventually even that sound stopped, and Sakura opened her eyes to see Ino kneeling in front of her, staring at her with an intensity she'd never seen before. Her face was haggard and tight, her eyes sunken. She was covered in dirt and filth from the last few days. But her eyes shone with an inner light, and her gaze was focused and sharp. "Teach me," she said. Sakura sighed and shook her head. She heard Ino gasp, so she raised her hand to forestall and complaints. I have no idea how to teach Ino. My own style is a mash of styles and skills and techniques from many sources, and most of them from my own studies and experiments. Someday, I might teach it to others, but it has to be finished first, and that assumes it suits you. You need someone to start you from the ground up, physical conditioning, basic katas, someone capable of teaching. Sakura smirked and leaned over to whisper in Ino's ear the name she and Shikamaru had picked out earlier, the one most likely to be able to help her get into fighting form. For a moment, Ino's eyes widened in worry, but the worry faded, to be replaced with determination. As soon as we're out of this forest, Ino said. Sakura gave her a pat on the back and smiled at her friend and rival, a genuine smile. I wonder, she thought as she watched Ino dig into another ration bar, is this what Kakashi-sensei feels like all the time? It was a bedraggled and sorry group that trudged to the tower entrance some hours later. Sasuke could see, and even use his Sharingan without any discomfort, but his body still ached from the night before, and he was leery about using his chakra for any but the most vital task, so he jogged out of the forest, without using chakra to speed his movements, all 5 kilometers, a tough run on a good day without chakra, never mind with his pain. But he pushed on, and managed a small smile when the tower became visible. Ino matched him, step for step, stopping only a few times to either take a sip of water or, after one rough patch, to empty her guts into the bushes. She was shaking by the time she could see the tower, exhausted on a level she had never experienced before, her mind and body worn until both were numbed by her exhaustion. Naruto had offered to carry her exactly once, and his nose still had flakes of blood from when she had hit him. Naruto and Sakura could not keep their eyes from darting between Sasuke and Ino, watching both carefully, their worry plain upon their face. Shikamaru had told them to do so, and when they objected, he pointed out that with 2 Byakugan users in their group, additional eyes were not needed. He also pointed out that he knew they'd both be watching them anyhow, so trying to get them to focus on anything else would be troublesome. The moment they saw the tower, Lee was running for it, screaming the word youth as loud as he could, one long shout that lasted all the way to the tower. Neji scoffed at the display, and like the rest, he paced Sasuke and Ino until they arrived as a group. Lee, said Naruto quietly as they entered. Why did you run off like that? It could have been dangerous if someone was waiting in ambush. Lee gave Naruto a brilliant smile, and raised his voice slightly as he answered, making sure that everyone could hear. That is so, Naruto-san, and that is why I did it. Out of the entire team, I was the least tired of those not on watch or escort duty. If there was an ambush, who better to draw their attention for the first assault than myself? One of Neji's eyebrow twitched slightly, and he managed a small, cruel smile. And if there was an ambush, he said casually, then you could impress Haruno-san with your skills, right? Lee frowned and shook his head. Sakura-san has made her opinion clear on the matter. There is no need to impress her. The entire group froze, a few of them carefully looking around, worried he was an imposter, but Tenten raised her hand in a waiting gesture, then crossed his arms and waited herself. After a moment, Lee continued, his voice raising as he said, I may not be the man she will date, but I have already impressed her with the power of my youth. Besides, what if one of the ambushed party fell for her beauty and decided to ask her out? I would be obliged to fight them then. Tenten nodded, and the group let out a sigh before entering the tower. Inside, they found a sign telling them, in a long and roundabout manner, to open both scrolls. Naruto and Sakura pulled out their set and opened them, revealing a seal used for summoning, which immediately began to smoke. They set the scrolls down and backed away quickly. When Iruka stepped out of the smoke, Naruto felt a sudden moment of nostalgia. He rarely got to see Iruka, between training and missions with Kakashi, and he suddenly felt a pang of loss that he'd not hung out with his teacher, his first true support and friend, in a long time. Then Iruka reached out and laid his hand on Naruto's shoulder, and the two looked at each other, and in that moment, Naruto realized his old teacher understood. I wonder, thought Naruto, if this is what Iruka feels all the time. Congratulations, Konoha teams, said Iruka with an easy smile. He went to each team, collecting their scrolls, before returning to stand before them. I am proud to see you all have made it, and more so that you chose to work together. Teamwork is important, but so is remembering that we're all part of one great team, the village Konohagakure. Is anyone injured? Every person in the room turned to Sasuke, who nodded. I've been bitten by someone called Orochimaru, and they left some kind of seal on my neck. He met Iruka's horrified gaze with one of confusion and rising concern. Why do you look so worried? It took only 5 minutes to assemble those who needed to be informed. Sasuke had been quickly ushered into a small waiting room and given food and water. Within a single minute, Kakashi had arrived, and was looking at Sasuke's neck with both eyes revealed. The very fact that he had his Sharingan visible made Sasuke feel a small, cold knot of fear form in his chest, but he smothered it and waited patiently. 2 minutes later, the proctor for the second exam, Anko, showed up. She nodded to Kakashi, with a degree of familiarity that the genin took note of. She then pulled Sasuke's head to one side roughly, took a quick look at the seal, and then retreated to a corner and started fidgeting with a kunai. 1 minute after that, Sarutobi Hiruzen, third Hokage and leader of the hidden village of the Leaf himself, walked briskly into the room. Sasuke gaped at his entrance, because Hiruzen came not in his normal robes of office, but in his battle gear, a black bodysuit, unadorned of any decorative quality, with only a single metal arm guard and a thickly armored hood. He strode into the room not with grace, but with power, certain and unstoppable, and for the first time, Sasuke got a glimpse of the man who carried Konohagaki through the last 2 shinobi world wars. He strode up and gently rested his hand on the boy's head, pulling back his hair slightly to look at the seal. He then stepped back and nodded to Sasuke, a brief flash of the kindly old man he had become over time, before his face turned back to the stern leader he had always been as he looked at the 2 older shinobi in the room. "Kakashi, opinion," he said, a curt order to be obeyed. Kakashi nodded, and when he spoke, his tone was as serious as the Hokage's. "It matches much of what we know of Orochimaru's Cure Seal program from before. Sasuke reported that the man cornered him and worked to convince him not to resist, then stretched his neck out and bit him, exactly where the seal is now. He also reported having requiring almost a full day of rest before becoming mobile. He has not used chakra since he regained control of his body and chakra system, and I have advised him to continue to do so until we came to a conclusion." Hiruzen nodded and turned to Anko. "It's different," she said without preamble. She reached up and pulled down the collar of her trench coat, revealing the seal on her own neck for inspection. She then walked over and pulled up Sasuke's hair. "The seal has 4 tomo marks, as opposed to my 3, and they face the opposite direction. Further, the tails are longer, forming almost a complete circle around the seal. Can we remove or seal this mark?" Hiruzen asked. Kakashi paused for a moment, then shook his head. "Maybe," he said, his tone growing darker. "Without knowing more on what it does and how it works, sealing it may do Sasuke more harm than good." He mentioned having physical control issues as well as chakra control issues while the seal was settling. Both imply the seal was affecting him on a physical level, not just through his chakra, but through his body itself. Further, I am not an expert at seals, and I know of no technique to use safely against this. Hiruzen nodded. "Solutions?" Anko spoke up first. "Seal his chakra off completely." When Sasuke whirled to glare at her, she raised her hands in a placating manner. "Temporarily. We can recall Jiraiya, get his opinion. With any luck, he'll be able to seal this away. We still only have a rough idea what the thing does to me, and I don't like the idea of one of our genin running around with an unknown seal ready to activate." Kakashi shook his head. "Orochimaru is known for his subtlety, and he's always had an interest in bloodlines for his research. I would not be surprised if this was meant to do nothing more than to drive Sasuke away from us by forcing us to crush his dreams out of fear of the unknown. I think we should at least have a Hyuga observe him through a few tests to see if he's safely functional and go from there." Hiruzen nodded, then turned his eyes to Sasuke. His features softened for just a moment, and in a gentle voice he said, "Opinion?" Sasuke wanted to shout, scream, for his right to continue to be a shinobi, to grow and train, to gain the strength to avenge his clan. He wanted to threaten to leave if they tried to seal him. He wanted to roar his defiance. But in the face of the Hokage's gentle words and fond gaze, his burning passion crumbled. Bereft of his anger, Sasuke took the time to look at his situation with cold logic. It took him a full minute to puzzle through his options, and in that time, nobody talked or pushed for him to hurry. "I do not wish to give up before I've really begun," he said quietly. "I have much to do in the future, and most of it requires me to be here, with my team and village. The risk of death or injury will not deter me. That said, making myself a risk to my team and village would be far worse, because if I cannot do what I must, who else would it fall to?" Sasuke took a deep, calming breath, and let his anger and pride out with the same exhalation. As painful as it was to admit his potential weakness in the face of what happened, no amount of fury would solve his problem. Kakashi had taught him, long ago and with great care, that one cannot power through challenges with nothing but fury alone. "I will do whatever tests you see fit. Should the seal be a danger, to myself or to others, we will do what we must to contain that danger. Even if it means the end of my life." He sighed to himself and closed his eyes. "Failure hurts," Kakashi had once said to him, after a particularly bad day of training, but true success can hurt a lot more. As much as it hurt, he had to face the chance that his dreams, his vengeance, would be crushed, but if he must, he would face it with pride worthy of any Uchiha. If he could not honor them with vengeance, he would honor them by accepting his burden with his head held high. He straightened and opened his eyes, to see the three adults looking at him, and for a moment, he saw the pride in their eyes at his strength. In the glow of their understanding and pride, as he looked up at his leader and his teacher, he found a balm for the pain of his loss. I wonder, he thought, if this is what the Hokage feels like all the time? Chapter 26. The rules are set. The first matches. Sasuke had been tested repeatedly while under the gaze of Hyuga Hayashi, the leader of the Hyuga clan, as well as the head of the medical corps, Enko, and Kakashi. The results had been disturbing. It's almost like a dedicated flow controller for his chakra, Hayashi had said when he finished his observations and made his report to the Hokage. His entire chakra system flows through the seal, and the seal normally does nothing. But when he tries to use it, the seal acts on his intent and bends the flow of his chakra to maximize the desired effect. The Hokage frowned at that. You see no loss in chakra, no unusual chakra, no sign of alteration or variation in the chakra beyond improved flow? None, Hokage-sama. Hiruzen turned to the head of the medical shinobi corps. You have found no evidence of alteration, on any physical level, when the seal is operating? The woman looked at a clipboard she had, thick with readings and test results, and shook her head. As far as we can tell, she said, flipping through the documents as if to check one last time for an error. The seal does not interact on a physical level with anything. Even the interpretation of intent appears to be caused by reactions to the flow of chakra, rather than through nerve impulses or other biological means, just as Hyuga-sama has said. The Hokage turned to share a look with Kakashi, who sighed and shook his head, and then his gaze fell onto Sasuke, his face growing stern even as his eyes softened. Sasuke, I cannot allow you to continue to compete in the Chunin exam. I am sorry, but this unknown seal is too dangerous. We will have to continue to observe it, at least until Jiraiya returns. His voice was deep, calm, and painfully certain. Sasuke felt the urge to shout, to argue, to do whatever it took to continue. He had a team, a good team. He was learning so much. He was growing stronger, and so were they, and together they might one day reach his goals, and beyond them. But Sarutobi Hiruzen did not take his eyes from Sasuke, and he was not some random shinobi to argue with. He was in charge for a reason, called the god of shinobi by friend and foe alike, respected here and feared abroad for his wisdom and intellect. Sasuke knew that if anyone had the right to make that call, it was the old man before him, looking saddened but determined. Sasuke bowed. I understand, he said quietly, biting back both anger and tears. He was shocked to feel the old man's hands lightly touch his shoulders and lift, raising him from his bow. Sasuke looked at the man as he smiled and patted his shoulder with one hand while fiddling with his pipe in the other. I am sorry to have to lie to you like that, the old man said, his lips curved upward slightly. I had to be sure. Orochimaru's previous seals were known for having a detrimental effect to those who suffered them, and those we have witnessed tend to show a marked decline in self-control as well, with one notable exception, who was little better to begin with. He snuck a glance at Enko, who was leaning against the wall. She stuck her tongue out at him, and he chuckled. Kakashi patted Sasuke's other shoulder and chuckled at the boy's confused look. Sasuke could see the curve in his mask that indicated he was smiling. What the Hokage is saying, Sasuke, is he had to forbid you from competing to see how you reacted. He is apologizing for that lie. So I can compete? Hiruzen looked at each person in the room in turn, and each gave a small nod, or in Enko's case, a thumbs up. He then looked at Sasuke and nodded as well. The last 2 days at the tower passed slowly for the Konoha group. Only a single successful team arrived after they did, the trio of Otogekyu shinobi that had picked a fight with Naruto before the written test, and they arrived only minutes after Sasuke was taken away by Kakashi. Every other team that arrived was injured, or in a couple cases, carrying a dead ally. Naruto spotted the red-haired girl that he and Shino had saved, crying and alone when she limped into the tower. His clones had seen her reunite with her team, so something must have happened to them again, this time without himself and Shino to save them. That thought made him antsy, and the others watched him pace the floor as they waited and watched for further arrivals, his head down, his mouth drawn into a frown. The Konoha group stayed together, sleeping in one large room that looked like it did duty as a meeting hall under normal circumstances. They had been assigned beds, just like every other arrival, but Shikamaru had pointed out that while they had passed the test, nobody had said anything about being safe from the other contestants. Naruto sent his clones out to find a good place to gather, and found the room deep in the building and apparently in use for some time. In the end, the group chose to camp there together rather than risk separation at this point. On the first night, Naruto sent out clones, hinged to look like the group, to give the impression that they was staying in their separate accommodations. It was less than an hour before he received memories from the clone disguised as Neji being stabbed in his sleep. 10 minutes later, the clones looking like Sakura and Naruto were also dispelled. None of the clones got a look at their attacker's face before they were dispelled. Shikamaru nodded thoughtfully when Naruto shared the news. "Someone is eliminating the competition," he said, frowning to himself as he thought. "Neji is well known as a genius, and Sakura and Naruto have some solid reputation from their mission a few months back. I suspect that Lee and Shino's clones will be next, and if Sasuke had won, it would have been first to go." Shikamaru was lazy, but he was also intelligent. Within a few more minutes, both Lee and Shino's clones dispelled. The remainder of the night was spent in rotating watches, and nobody walked the tower alone after that. On the second night, Sasuke was brought to the group. He was ushered in by Kakashi himself, as well as an Anbu member, one of the anonymous and powerful shinobi hand-picked by the Hokage to fulfill difficult missions. Shikamaru was careful to hide his reaction to the escort, and saw Shino spare a glance at him. Why would Sasuke need an Anbu-level escort into the middle of a Chunin-level test? Shinobi were graded by their capability, and the power difference between grades was immense. A single jonin like his own sensei, Asuma, could easily destroy any genin team unless he was caught unawares and in a weakened state. Simply having Kakashi as an escort should have been more than enough. The group stood and gathered around quickly, greeting Sasuke in a manner ranging from a quiet nod from Shino to a loud whoop from Naruto. Kakashi waved them all down with his hands, saying, Sasuke's fine, we had him examined thoroughly. Nothing he can't work through, right, Sasuke?" Sasuke scoffed. Work through is not anywhere near the right words. He huffed slightly and looked away. "I'm probably better rested than you guys. I'll be fine." The Konoha group relaxed at the news, except for Ino. She was standing away from the others, her back turned to them. Sakura gave Sasuke a nudge and nodded to the blonde girl, drawing a pained groan from Sasuke. He trudged over and stood behind Ino, waiting for her to turn. When she did not, he reached out and gently turned her around to face him. She continued to look down on the floor, and he could hear her softly muttering apologies. For failing him. For being weak. Sasuke looked back at Sakura, who pointed vigorously at the other girl, mouthing the most dreaded of words. "Help her." "I don't do that," he mouthed back. "Figure it out," was the reply. Sasuke rolled his eyes and bit back a sigh. He had no problem with Sakura in general. After the wave mission, what little weird fangirl bits of her that remained had vanished, and he had not seen them since. And she was putting a lot of effort into training. But sometimes she forgot who he was. Even before he lost his family, the only one who used to be able to comfort him when he was upset was his mom, who managed it because she was his mom, and… No. He glared at Sakura and shook his head. She pointed again and stomped the floor slightly. He shook his head again. She took a deep breath, her jaw setting, then reached into her pouch and withdrew a pair of leather gloves, her fighting pair, and made a show of putting them on while glaring at him. And behind her, Kakashi shrugged and nodded at Ino. Sasuke shot a betrayed face at Kakashi, then schooled his face into, if not good cheer, then at least passive non-aggression. He turned to Ino, then raised his hand and pushed on her forehead with his index finger, increasing the pressure slowly until he got her head up high enough for her to meet his eyes. "We were ambushed by an enemy well beyond our abilities," he said calmly. "It happens. Let's just be glad we both survived, so we can grow stronger and do better next time." Sasuke mentally flinched, even as he struggled to keep his face still. Never mind that he was acting like that man, he was also deliberately acting cool to one of his most rabid fangirls. He imagined Ino squealing with glee and jumping around and acting like she had just won the lottery, and thus was deeply surprised when she quietly nodded her head and gave him a small and rather pathetic smile. She even managed not to cry, in spite of the tears welling in her eyes. He forced a small smile of his own, then backed away, already discomforted by the close contact, already hurting inside with the memories of his bro. That man, doing the same for him. Naruto chose that moment to grab Sasuke by the belt and lift him over his head, letting out a cheer as he did so. Hearing the others laugh over it was mostly unpleasant for Sasuke. Mostly. "Dope? Yeah, team? Put me the fuck down." Later that night, while everyone was settling down and arranging who would be on watch, Sakura gave Sasuke a tap on the shoulder and pointed out into the corridor, a worried look on her face. When they both got out there, she quietly shut the door and scanned the corridor with her eyes before turning back to him. "I saw the thing on your neck," she said quietly. I have to ask the same thing I asked Naruto. Is it safe, both for you and for us? Sasuke nodded once slowly. As far as we can tell, and by we, I mean an awful lot of experts, medics, and the Hokage himself, it's a harmless seal, possibly even useful. It might actually make me stronger. Sakura wanted to sigh with relief, but the look in his eyes was dark. As far as we can tell, she repeated. He nodded again. You and Naruto might want to keep an eye on me, to be safe. Others with similar seals have, in the past, experienced aggression issues. If you ever see me get unreasonably angry, or otherwise act irrational, you may need to stop me, or at least warn someone of higher rank if it's something disastrous. But as far as anyone can tell, the seals should not have that sort of effect on me. Sakura nodded, and scanned the corridor one more time. She then leaned in slightly and made the sign language for secret. Sasuke leaned in as well, head turned slightly to one side. Excuse me for a second, she whispered before putting her arms around him and giving him a hug. It was over almost immediately, just a brief moment of pressure, and she backed away before Sasuke could react. Sorry, she said. It's not your thing and all, but I was worried about you. And I know you were pushing yourself to help Ino. And even if I don't act like I used to, I still have a little fangirl in me. Her voice trailed off, and she looked at the floor sheepishly before looking up at him again. Sorry, she said once more, through a smile that looked completely unapologetic. Sasuke frowned, but he knew she meant well, and at least she wasn't trying to kiss him. Or lift him over her head. I forgive you. This time. Sakura laughed and gave him a playful swat on the shoulder before opening the door and walking back into the room with a jaunty step, waving over her shoulder and saying, Never change, Sasuke. And out in the dark corridor, where he was sure she would never see it, he smiled slightly before adopting a stern look and walking back into the light. All of those who qualified were gathered on the 5th day and lined up in rows of 3, each row containing a full team. The room was massive, a single large and empty space with observation walkways high above. On a slightly raised platform rested a statue of 2 hands shaped in the hand seal for confrontation, and on that platform stood the Jonin who had remaining competitors, fronted by the Hokage himself and flanked by the proctors from the previous exam sections. Anko stepped forward and said, At this point, Hokage-sama will explain to you about the purpose of this exam. Please pay attention. She turned to the Hokage and nodded. If you would do us the honor, Hokage-sama? Hiruzen stepped forward and coughed lightly into his fist. Before we tell you the details of the next step, I must explain to you the true purpose of this exam. He waited a moment for the sound of the genin shifting at that statement to stop, then continued. In the past, you have been told that these exams are for diplomatic relations between the hidden villages, or that it is done to showcase our shinobi. These are only partially true. This exam has one true purpose, however. War. The genin shifted, and several started to speak, but Hiruzen waved them down. The Chunin exam began as organized warfare, a chance to test our foes in battle without risking mindless destruction and damage to our lands. Yes, this test is used to find candidates for promotion, but that is not its primary purpose. Instead, it is a measurement of the strength of your village. The final part of the exam will be witnessed by many, including many potential clients, feudal lords and other powerful people. They will witness these final battles, and they will vote for the winners with the lifeblood of the shinobi world, their money. A good showing in the finals is not just a measure of you, but of your nation and its strength. That is why the Chunin exam is the first deadly challenge that most of you will face. It weeds out the unfit, the weak, and the fools, while showing the other nations and our patrons the strength of our newest shinobi. The genin mutter amongst themselves, until Gaara's cold voice spoke over them. I don't care. Tell us the details of this deadly exam. Hiruzen frowned, but made no other move. He instead waved his hand, summoning the final proctor. He jumped from the ceiling and landed in a crouch before the Hokage, then slowly stood and turned to face the genin. Even as he did so, he coughed, a wet and painful cough from deep in his chest. His face was pale and drawn, and his eyes had dark bags under them. This is not a healthy man, thought Naruto. I am Gecko Hate, the proctor for the third part of the exams. He gave a deep, racking cough, then continued. The details are simple. We have too many candidates for the finals, so we shall hold a preliminary match immediately. The genin shifted as the man coughed hard for a few moments, and a few shouted about how unfair it was for the wounded. Life is unfair, he continued. More so for a shinobi. However, should you feel unable to continue, you may step out now. Naruto looked around, but nobody budged. Shikamaru looked like he wanted to bow out, and Ino was barely paying attention. Gaara had a very large and deeply worrying smile on his face. So did the gray-haired Konoha shinobi who had tried to quiet them down just before the written exam. Sakura and Sasuke, however, shared a glance with him, and there was no question of backing down. Naruto shot them a thumbs up and smiled. The proctor waited a few more moments before he nodded. Your opponents will be selected at random, and their names displayed on the board above. All others must go to the observation platforms. A fight ends when your foe is dead, unable to fight, or yields. When I say the match is over, it is over, and continuing to attack could get you disqualified, or worse. He gave them a sickly smile, and behind him, the Jonin sensei for the various teams, as well as the Hokage, all jumped to the platforms. Oddly, almost all of them chose the right-handed platform, except for the Odo Jonin, who chose the left. Hade turned to the board, an electronic display designed around a simple series of light bulbs, good only for displaying text, and nodded to an unseen operator. After a moment, 2 names flashed onto the board. Haruno Sakura, Abirame Shino, please remain. The rest of you may gather as you like on the platforms. Sakura gave her team a high five, then started to slip on her leather gloves. Kiri remained on her shoulder, clinging tight, and aside from taking a moment to groom herself, showed no interest in her foe. For his part, Shino moved to the center and stood quietly, not moving in the least. Sakura watched as one of his Kakashi bugs crawled across his face, and grinned. She was not so easy to disturb as she once was, but she had to admire him, trying to intimidate her without the usual trash talk she would have expected. Between the sunglasses, the high collar hiding most of his face, and the bugs crawling over him, Shino could be an intimidating figure. She thought for a moment, then shouted out, "Hey, Shino! I'll try not to squish too many of them, but your bugs are not going to win this match. And you took your tracker off of me already, right? It's be unfair to start with that sort of advantage." Shino adjusted his glasses, his eyebrows rising slightly. "I appreciate your concern for my swarm, Haruno-san, and I assure you, I will do no meaningful harm to Kiri-san. Why? To do so would be to dishonor the goodwill you show my own companions." She could not see his face, but his voice was a touch warmer than usual. His eyebrows lowered again. "I have removed the tracking bug. You are correct, it would be a poor showing if I did not follow the rules to the letter." Sakura glanced at Kiri, who narrowed her eyes and swished her tail a few times, tapping code onto Sakura's back as she did. Sakura shrugged the shoulder the cat was sitting on slightly to indicate an agreement, then nodded at the proctor. "Yeah, rules are very important, especially when following them to the letter." She crouched into her stance and smirked. "Whenever you are ready, Hayate-sama." Hate raised his hand. "Let the first match of the preliminaries begin." His hand dropped, and Sakura burst into action. Even as Shino raised his hands, summoning his swarm, she was cartwheeling back, Kiri leaping to the floor and running with her. When she was almost all the way across the floor, she dropped a smoke bomb, which exploded and filled a fourth of the room. Within, she stopped tumbling and slowly, silently backed up, hand reaching for what she was looking for. "Hey, Shino!" she shouted cheerfully, hidden in the smoke. Shino raised one of his arms, and sent half of his swarm forward, slowly, into the smoke. They reported no poison or insecticide in the smoke, as Haruno-san promised. Its only value was concealment, and Sakura was ruining that use by shouting at him, revealing her general position. That made no sense. "I find I am confused," Shino thought to himself. It was important for a logical shinobi to admit that to themselves when it happens, so they could properly face the puzzle that confused them. And he knew exactly what a logical shinobi should do when faced with an unguessable tactic. He pulled his insects back and prepared to defend himself, the insect clone technique ready for immediate action, a technique that would allow his insects to take his visual form and swap with him to distract an attacker. After a few moments of tense silence, he decided to prompt a reaction. "What is it, Haruno-san?" The smoke shifted slightly, pulling away from Shino, and he heard a metallic slam. His insects reported a new air current flowing out of the room coming from the other side of the smoke. "Nobody said we had to stay in this room for the fight," Sakura called out cheerfully, and Shino heard the sounds of her feet quietly running into the other rooms of the tower. He turned and gave the proctor a look. Hade started to speak, then stopped and glanced at the Hokage, who was smiling. "She is technically correct," the Hokage said. "You never said they had to remain in the room for the fight." Shino nodded to the Hokage, then turned and darted into the rapidly clearing smoke, his swarm surrounding him and buzzing furiously. Up on the observation deck, Naruto laughed loudly, cheering and shouting her name, quickly joined by Lee and Guy, making the entire room boom with their voices. Asuma's mouth had slackened, dropping a half-finished cigarette, and he remained that way until Shikamaru nudged him, after which he smiled and shook his head while reached for another. Sasuke was smirking, as was Kurenai. Even the Jonin for the Sand Shinobi had a small smile, from what could be seen under the sheet hanging in front of half of his face, and he did not seem the sort of man to smile often. But nobody was smiling as hard as Kakashi, safely behind his mask. Because he had seen the look on the Hokage's face when Sakura ran out, when everyone else had been looking at the smoke, and it had been priceless. "That's my girl," Kakashi said to the others, hooking a thumb at the open door. Sarutobi Hiruzen, third Hokage, was a hard man to surprise, but he was surprised, enough so that let out a small chuckle himself. He turned to Hate with a smile on his face and said, "Let's get to the camera system, shall we?" Sakura slipped into a small meeting room, deep inside the tower, and looked around. The place had several doors leading further into the building, but a quick check indicated they did not seem to lead in the general direction of the arena, leaving them as viable escape routes. The room was small for its design and simple, a small space that had been partitioned off from a larger space at some point in the distant past. It was perfect for her needs. Fight Shino is a wide open space. No, thank you. Without some sort of cover, the match would be over before it began. She would dodge and evade, and the swarms would follow her. If she moved to engage, all Shino had to do was fight her to a standstill until they caught up. Even if she was as fast as Lee, Shino could pull his swarms back and simply defend himself until she tired. There was no good fight to be had there for her, and there was no rule saying she had to do so. Bet they'll add that to the rulebook when this is done. She listened carefully at the door, turning her head periodically to focus her hearing to a different area. She waited and listened, and eventually she was rewarded with the sound of Shino approaching, stepping quietly. She smiled to herself, listening carefully, and did not move as he walked by. A minute later, she heard a second set of footsteps come close, and this time, she knew it was the right time. She pulled back slightly and flexed her arm. "Hell yeah!" she screamed, smashing into the thin wooden wall that was used to partition the room, and through it, her entire body focused in the effort, pushing her forward, until her fist plowed into Shino, who flew across the hallway and hit the other wall hard enough to bounce. That side of the hallway was part of the original room, something she realized when she was running this way, evidenced by the different trim along the walls and floors. Those walls were solid enough to take a blow, unlike the thin ones she had just smashed through. Sakura kneed the remainder of the wall she had pushed through, smashing through it, and moved into attack. She knew his swarm would be back in seconds after the attack, and she pushed herself as hard as she could, trying to end the match quickly. She darted forward and raised her leg to stomp on him, but he had already recovered, spinning his entire body and lashing out at her one leg with both of his. Already committed to her attack, Sakura took the blow to her legs and fell. She fell forward onto Shino, grinning. Her arms reached out, grabbing at Shino's, her legs now tangling into his. She pulled, her strength far greater than his, and when his arms parted enough, she arched her back and then curled inward, smashing her forehead into his face, her Hittite's metal plate and cloth padding preventing damage to her even as it increased the damage to him. God, I hope Ino doesn't see me using my forehead as a weapon, I'll never hear the end of it. Shino was hurt, one lens of his glasses cracked, his nose clearly broken, but he continued to struggle, shifting in her grip, trying to get a leg between them, anything to clear the distance and hold her off. She gave him another headbutt, but he twisted as she did so, and she did not hit him with near enough force. She raised her head again, then heard the sound of his swarm flying at her. She shoved off of him, as hard as she could, sending herself flying back into the hole she had made, just in time to see the swarm arrive, forming a living barrier between her and her target. She paused, long enough to see Shino start to move, then dashed to the back of the room and ran through one of the doors. Shimura Maoki, civilian security specialist, was having a nerve-wracking day. Usually, her job as one of the shift guards for the complex camera systems installed in various important areas of Konoha was an easy and pleasant one. Watching over the Konoha library or the exterior of the Hokage's tower was a boring job, more so as she was only a tertiary defense, after the normal shinobi patrols and occasional Anbu guard hiding and watching. Civilians were only there as a defense against corruption, and even she was first to admit that excuse was only a paper-thin screen hiding the simple truth that she was there only to make the other civilians feel better. If they could get past the patrols and Anbu, they could get past Maoki and her camera system. Still, she enjoyed her boring job, and as much as her distant uncle complained, she enjoyed the peace and warmth of her village. None of that warmth or peace was with her now. She was standing nervously at the back of her monitoring station, having been politely steered there by the Hokage himself, who gave her a pat on the shoulder as he did so. He was sitting in her chair even now, flipping through cameras at a speed that made her eyes ache, never missing a moment of the two genin hunting each other through the tower. Sitting and sometimes standing around the Hokage were living legends as well. Hatake Kakashi the copy nin was sitting on her supervisor's chair, and with the sudden break in decorum as a result of his student's move, he was cheerfully munching on some sort of puffed grain cereal. He was eating it through his mask, the very act of which hurt Myoki's eyes as much as the flickering screens. Next to him was the sublime green beast of Konoha, Mato Guy, leaning over Kakashi's shoulder and cheering so loudly that the room was vibrating. His voice was painful, but the man gave Myoki eyes a rest at least, because he was built. That was a man's man, never mind the bowl cut or eyebrows. When her eyes needed rest from the rest of the room, they settled carefully and discreetly on his buttocks, and her mind kept returning to a single question. Can you literally bend steel on them, or did they just look like it? Yes, you can literally bend steel on almost any part of him, came a quiet voice, causing Myoki to lift her eyes nervously from Guy's qualities and look at the woman standing next to her. She did not recognize the red-eyed woman, but she had an aura of confident power that signified her position as an elite, and the small smirk on her face did little to help Myoki's nerves. We had to test it for a bet he and Kakashi made. You're not the first to think about that. She leaned in slightly and whispered. He's also dense as the rock he seems to be made of, which means he's available. Just saying. She smirked and gave Myoki a pat on the shoulder, then moved up to get a better view of the screens. Myoki tried to resist, but her gaze slowly returned to the Jonin's powers. It was a nerve-wracking experience for a mere civilian security specialist. But it had its benefits. Naruto kicked at the floor and grumbled. I don't care how crowded the room is, I wanted to see Sakura fight. Sasuke shrugged. I bet 5 Ryo the whole thing is being taped by the security console, and Kakashi will snag the tape before the day is done. Naruto thought for a moment, then shook his head. No bet. Shino opened a door and looked into the darkened room. It was large enough to have support pillars along either side, and the decor implied it was some sort of reception area. He walked a few feet forward, looking carefully, then turned and shut the door behind him. He darted behind one of the pillars and paused to think. He had been tracking Sakura throughout the tower, trying to distract her with his insect clones, trying to get her to jump one and allow herself to be swarmed. But no matter what he tried, she always found him. He'd send the 2 clones he could form forward, and had been ambushed when Sakura dropped out of a tiled ceiling. He'd step forward first himself, letting his clones trail him as if waiting for her to jump. She had literally opened a door he was reaching for and punched him in the face, then casually shut the door again. Shino had blushed under his collar after he recovered from that one. Worse, she was smart enough to disengage when threatened. The moment his swarm would get within striking distance, she would be in full retreat, and her strikes were so powerful that he dared not pursue her too far, lest she double back and hit him in passing. He had almost lost the match when she opened the door and hit him, and the only reason he was still in the running was because his swarm had defended him while he struggled to remain conscious. But now they were in a dead end, the final room. He had left the door open for a moment, trying to draw her out in an attempt to escape and continue her game, but she had made no move. But how can she know what is really me? Shino gathered his swarm to watch over him and thought carefully. She must be sensing something different between me and my swarm. I am confused. I must think calmly to determine what that is. It was not vision. His insect clones were well practiced, so much so that his own parents could not tell the difference on inspection. It was not smell. His personal odor was dominated completely by his hive and the pheromones they put out, so his clones smelled the same as himself. It was not touch, she had avoided them completely. He doubted it was taste. A rare smile formed on his lips, hidden by his collar. I am no longer confused. Sakura crouched behind the pillar and waited, turning her head just slightly, listening carefully. Her ears were quite powerful, something she had gained training with Kiri, and with the help of Sim. The principle was the same as the Inuzuka clan's scent training, focusing chakra into her ears and being exposed to slowly rising and falling sounds. Over time, her hearing had become incredible. Enough to track a mouse behind the wall. Enough to hear if Dan was in his shop from across the street. Enough to discern between a flying swarm of insects acting as a clone and the non-flying insects in Shino's body. She heard footsteps, accompanied by the drone of Shino's hive, and with a roar she jumped from her spot and lunged. Shino backed up, parried wildly, and Sakura saw his clone on the other side of the room, far too distant to get to his aid quickly. This is it, she thought as she roared and lunged at full speed and power directly at the boy, leading with her shoulder to knock him down. Once on the floor, she could dominate him. She passed into his body, and with its own droning roar, the clone burst apart and descended on her. They latched onto her skin, and Sakura hissed as she felt the burning sensation of the Kikeichu feeding on her chakra. She stumbled slightly, resisting the urge to slap at the insects, then tripped and fell. You fought well, Haruno-san. Shino, the real Shino, the one she thought was a clone, walked over and knelt next to her. How? Asked Sakura weakly. I determined that, of all the senses, sound must be the one you were using to detect me. I recalled a few of my flying Kikachu and had them start buzzing in my body. The entire remainder of my swarm landed on each other and forced themselves to move without wings. It was a difficult task for them, and for me. He stood and adjusted his glasses. Now yield, so I need not hurt you. On the floor, Sakura smirked. Shino felt a weight settle on his shoulders, a vibrating weight that purred in delight at him. He also felt the claws, latching carefully and only slightly painfully on either side of his neck, directly over the primary sources of blood flow to his brain. Shino stiffened, and for the second time that day, he blushed at his mistake. I forgot about Kiri. Sakura pulled herself up. I'm not as bad off as you think, and Kiri is fresh, having done nothing but shadow you this entire match, as soon as you exited the smoke. Yield. Shino nodded, and his swarm flew off of Sakura. I made a tactical error. Had I kept some reserve, they could have tried to take Kiri by surprise, but it took the whole hive to make a clone that does not fly. I yield. Well fought, Haruno-san. Sakura smiled as Kiri jumped from Shino's shoulders to hers and started to rub against her hair. She held out a fist, and after a moment's hesitation, Shino raised his own and bumped it to hers. The security room was silent. Every person in the room, from the Hokage to the civilian, was looking at Kakashi, who leaned back, arms behind his head, and smiled at them with untainted glee. That's my girl, he repeated. Tell me you got the tape, Naruto said as soon as Kakashi stepped out. He'd heard hate over the intercom, calling the match for Sakura and summoning them back to the arena. Kakashi shrugged and shook his head. What? Why? Hokage-sama beat me to it. Chapter 27, Konochi at Range. Tenten vs. Kin. Sakura and Shino returned to the arena to the sound of cheering. Most of the Konoha genin and several of the Jonin sensei were shouting or clapping their approval, not just for Sakura, but for Shino as well. A few more, like the Suna Jonin and his female genin, managed to smile and nod in acknowledgement of the bout. And a few, like the entire group from Odo, simply stared. But all that was secondary to the two genin, because on the arena floor, Sarutobi Hiruzen stood, hands clasped behind his back and a surprisingly cheerful grin on his face. Welcome back to both of you. He raised an arm, quieting the others, then turned to Sakura and spoke loud enough to be heard by all. In my time as Hokage, I never felt the need to give much consideration to the rules to the Chunin exam. There has never been a need for it before. And yet today, I find that I must examine carefully what has been taken for granted by countless others before you. This is no small feat, Haruno Sakura, and you have every right to be proud of what you have done. Sakura started to blush heavily, and it only intensified when Naruto gave out another cheer from the stands. Hiruzen turned to Shino, his smile still in place. You too should be proud, Aburame Shino. When faced with an opponent who changed the very nature of your mission, you checked in with those in charge, rather than assume you should pursue. When given confirmation, you did not hesitate to act, and proceeded in a sensible manner with your mission. Your loss may be unfortunate, but you should also be proud. I fully expect you to succeed the next time you enter this arena. Hiruzen gave a dry chuckle. Not the least of which because we must now become much more specific in the terms we use to describe this test. There was some muffled chuckles from the Konoha teams, and one possible snort from those from Suna. From here on out, leaving this arena will be considered a forfeit. In the future, we may expand the arena to provide more cover and options, but for this year, it shall remain a test of strengths. Besides, until we know of the future plans, I would rather we not destroy too many walls. This last got a few more laughs, and Sakura turned to give her fellow Konoha genin a bow. The Hokage waved at Sakura and Shino, dismissing them. They turned and bowed to each other, a formal show of good sportsmanship, then jumped to their team's places on the platform above. Why you did good, Shino-kun, said Hinata, gently patting him on one shoulder. She reached into her pocket and offered him some of her medicinal cream, which he accepted with a grateful bow, revealing his heavily damaged face. Kiba laughed and punched Shino lightly in the arm, and over Akamaru's yapping said, She mangled you, man! I can't believe she got you! You had that wrapped up! Shino shook his head, and his teammates could hear that the stoic young man's voice was filled with respect and a hint of reproach. I allowed myself to be complacent once my allies had her in their grasp. I will not make that mistake again. And should you make it to the finals, do not take Haruno-san and Kiri-san lightly, Kiba. He sat carefully on a bench, his back rigid, and started to focus his chakra on his bugs, encouraging them to aid the healing process on his injuries, while applying the cream to his face with care. Sakura, meanwhile, was greeted with a loud cheer from Naruto, who jumped in and picked up Kiri to spin her about, singing her praise even as she stared at him moodily. Sasuke held out his fist to Sakura, who bumped it and grinned. "Good job," he said, and his small smile was genuine. She smiled back, then turned to pry Kiri's claws from Naruto's face before he could even begin to shout. "Good job indeed," said Kakashi, resting a hand on her shoulder and looking at her with obvious pride. "You should know that you surprised a lot of competent, experienced shinobi today, including the Hokage himself. Also, the Hokage swiped the security tapes for your match before I could get to them. I would not be surprised if they end up circulating amongst the shinobi forces in the near future, as a lesson on thinking outside the box. I could not be prouder of you, Sakura." Sakura beamed at Kakashi-sensei, and reached up to scratch Kiri's chin, drawing a contented purr from the cat. "I couldn't have done it without you, my friend." She walked over to the bench and slouched down, relaxing every muscle in her arms, legs, and back, spreading out over her seat exactly like a cat who has found your favorite jacket on the bed. Kiri curled around her neck and went limp as well. But both had their eyes open, and were carefully watching the upcoming matches. Some of these people might be her foe in the next round, after all. Soon, the screen lit again, and the next two contenders were called forward by Hate, who managed to restrain his coughing long enough to do so. "Tsuchikin, Tenten, step forward, please." Tenten stood and stretched, smiling, with a dangerous glint in her eyes. She looked at Gai-sensei and Lee, who gave her a pair of identical youthful poses. "Go forth and show them the power of your youth and the edge of your weapons, Tenten," said Gai, boisterous as ever, while Lee simply shouted, "Youth!" from behind their teacher. She turned to Neji, who was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "Not going to wish me luck?" she asked, trying to remain cheerful. Neji barely moved, only turning his head slightly to aim his eyes at her. "Your foe looks like one who puts a lot of stock in appearance. I doubt she has trained nearly as hard as you. You're fated to win, I am sure." Tenten rolled her eyes. While Kakashi-sensei had managed to break some of Neji's arrogance out of him, he still retained his fatalistic streak. If anything, it was now more intense, now that he was open to learning techniques outside of his clan. Apparently, he was fated to bring outside influences to the famously traditional clan. She shook her head, banishing thoughts about her team, and jumped down to meet her foe. Kin was already below, having wasted no words on her team or sensei. She wore a simple dull green vest and a matching set of pants and scarf that shared a blotchy camouflage pattern in gray and black. Her hair ran all the way to the back of her shins, long and luxurious. But most importantly, to Tenten, she was smirking the entire time, her entire stance speaking of confidence, not just in her strength, but in her foe's weakness. "Wait and see, you smirking schmuck." Hate raised his hand between them. Tenten crouched slightly, her eyes narrowing, her body tensed and ready to begin. Kin crossed her arms and smirked harder. "Begin!" Kin's arms moved the moment Hate's hand began to drop, throwing 6 saban at Tenten before the man's voice faded. Her smirk faded slightly when Tenten ducked under her surprise attack without the slightest hesitation and replied with a kunai, which landed at Kin's feet. She flinched slightly away, then looked at the blade in the ground. There was no explosive tag, nor any seals, or any other sign of danger. "You seriously can't even throw straight, Kin Y dash." Kin's eyes widened, and she dove to the floor as another kunai passed directly through where her face had been moments earlier. She turned her dive into a desperate roll as more and more kunai buried themselves into the floor behind her, then a desperate backpedal when they started to arrive directly in front of her. She turned to look at Tenten, who was standing in the same pose, slightly crouched, a single scroll partially unrolled in one hand. "I never miss," said Tenten, her eyes never leaving her opponent. Her left hand flexed slightly, sliding the scroll open a little more, and with a quick motion, Tenten placed her hand above the storage seal that was revealed and pulled another kunai from the scroll. Kin's hands flashed, and she drew another set of saban, this time from her special pouch, and let them fly. There was a sound of ringing in the air as the needles flew, the bells attached to them tinkling quietly. Tenten stepped slightly to the side, directly into the gap in the middle of the set of saban. The gap Kin deliberately left in her throw. She reached again for some saban, sidestepping another throw from Tenten as she did so, and let them fly in the same pattern, but with a couple bell less saban in the gap this time. She had practiced her skills for ages, testing her theory on target after target, and the results were always promising. When faced with her bell saban, foes instinctively latched on to the sound to indicate where the fast-moving and hard-to-see needles were. Then, once they had, she would throw some saban without the bells in the mix, and her foes would often ignore the soundless needles until it was too late. Kin smirked as the Saban flew, and then lost her smirk when Tenten dodged hard to the side, avoiding both kinds of needles while continuing with her own attacks. Kin started dodging frantically as she threw more and more of her mixed needles to no effect. Tenten meanwhile kept throwing a steady stream of kunai, one at a time and with frightful accuracy, at an exact rate of 1 per second. Kin lurched and jumped and rolled away, reversing direction frequently as Tenten got an eye for her movements. Tenten, meanwhile, dodged in a sedate and careful manner, never moving more than a body length away from her starting point. "You may as well stop with the bells," she said cheerfully after almost a full minute. Kin was covered in sweat and dirt from her efforts, while Tenten looked as fresh as she had when she got into position. "I told you my aim is excellent, and so is my eyesight. I can see how many are coming at me." "Not anymore," said Kin with a devilish smile. She twitched a finger, and several of her bells started to ring in a dissonant manner, raising a clamor that seemed to build on itself, until Tenten clutched at her head and stumbled slightly to one side. She glanced down at the floor, steadying herself, but when she looked back up, there were now several Kins standing in a line. Each one hefted a handful of saban, and smiled viciously at her. Tenten unsealed several more weapons and tossed them quickly, and was gratified to see the various Kins all dodging, the exact same move repeated by each image. This means two things, Tenten thought. First, it's an effect on my own perception, not a Bunshin or other clone technique. Second, she is still in the group, and probably somewhere near the middle of the pack. She started to focus on the two in the center, trying to find the real Kin, but her foe was careful to dodge attacks on both herself and her nearest double, preventing Tenten from picking her out. Then Tenten flinched and jumped to one side as Kin started throwing again. A lot harder to dodge when you don't know which ones are real, isn't it? Each Kin threw at the same time, and the images made a mere 6 needles look like 60. But Tenten smiled and started to weave slightly, avoiding all of the needles. Kin frowned, and started to speed up her throws, but only the false needles struck Tenten, passing through her harmlessly. Soon, Tenten was throwing back again, her throws fast and wild, most of the kunai hitting the ground at Kin's feet. Kin finally stopped throwing, having spent most of her ammunition to no effect. "That's simply not possible," she snarled at her opponent, who was rolling up her now empty scroll. "How can you possibly avoid every real needle?" Tenten laughed in her face. "I told you, my aim is excellent, and so is my eyesight. There are only 2 ways you can attack me with that illusion. You can have your duplicates all throw forward, in which case, I only need to dodge the ones coming near me, because the others are duplicates. Or you can have them all throw at me, in which case, all the incoming needles form a focal point at wherever you're aiming. Step away from that focal point, and the real needles miss. For all your masterful throwing skills, you are no match for me. Yield now." Kin rolled her eyes at the trash talk. "Bring it." Tenten made 3 hand seals and took a deep breath. Kin froze, slightly confused at the sudden change in tactics, and that was all Tenten needed. Tenten was not very skilled at the grand fireball technique by traditional standards. When she exhaled, instead of a tight ball of flame, she sprayed a thin sheet of fire from her mouth, blanketing the area before her. Kin raised her hands in front of her, but while slightly painful, the fire was no threat to her. As soon as it passed, she dropped her arms and prepared another throw. Then she heard the hissing sound. Kin looked down at her feet, and what she saw chilled her to the bone. There were 2 types of kunai on the ground around her, some with standard brown corded handles, and some with green. Fully a third of the weapons had green handles, and they were tightly clustered around her and her doubles. And the green cords around the handles were rapidly burning away, winding a hissing trail from the pommel ring to the base of the blade itself. Like a fuse. "I never miss," said Tenten, turning away and diving to the ground. The explosion that followed was terrifying to behold. It was no fancy, beautiful fireball, but a nearly invisible wall of concussive force. The kunai themselves were shredded instantly by the force of the explosion, flying out at terrible speeds in all directions, embedding those pieces in the floor, walls, ceiling, observation platforms, and Kin as well. When the dust and debris started to settle, Tenten picked herself off of the floor, hissing at the few tiny cuts on her legs from stray shrapnel, then looked at her foe. Kin was on the ground, curled into a ball and bleeding profusely. Her arms and legs, carefully held close, had taken the brunt of the shrapnel, and were in such tatters that Tenten doubted the girl could move even if she wasn't incapacitated from the blast itself. The room was silent for a moment, before Hate appeared beside her. "Winner, Tenten," he said calmly as he waved some medics over for the fallen girl. The cheers from the Konoha teams were slightly more subdued than they had been for Sakura, but the serious-looking blonde girl from Suna gave her a respectful nod, and coming from what looked like a serious kunoichi like herself, that meant more than any amount of cheering. "Well done, Tenten!" shouted Lee when she arrived back with the rest of her team. "You blossomed beautifully before all of the spectators today." Tenten glanced at Guy, who had the dignity to cough into his hand and look away, then sighed. Lee was a good guy, but she was beginning to wonder if he was deliberately pulling her chain sometimes. "I told you. Your fate determined your victory over your opponent." Neji had yet to move from his spot against the wall, and his tone was not congratulatory, but condescending. It was probably as close as she would ever get to a positive reaction from the Hyuga boy, but suddenly that wasn't enough. Tenten whirled on him and stomped forward, until she was directly in front of him. "You keep saying that fate determines everything. Fate made my victory. Fate ensures yours. Fate, fate, fate. Fuck fate. I earned my victory. I earned it with hard work, planning, and skill. I earned it with sweat and more than a little blood." Neji shook his head at her. "How it happens does not matter. Fate is dash." Tenten gave him a light push, but enough to force him to stand up straight. He barely moved, but by the look on his face, it was as if she'd attacked him. "You think you're all stoic?" she shouted at him. "Will you be saying it was fate when you lose? Will that be fate too?" "I won't lose." Neji sneered at her, his face turned ugly with disdain. "None here can best me. Not the Uchiha. Not Lee. And not you." He turned away from her and crossed his arms. "Pray we do not meet in the finals, Tenten. I won't hold back." "Neither will I." Tenten grit her teeth and turned away as well, walking to the other side of Guy and Lee. Lee looked confused at the way his teammates were acting, but Guy, the look on his face was not confused. He looked like he understood the situation perfectly, and it pained him. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes and counting down from 10, before opening them again. After a moment, she tentatively raised her hand and gave Guy a thumbs up. It wasn't as youthful as his own, but it brought a small smile to his face at least. Standing behind Guy, his face turned away but his Byakugan active and watching the scene, Neji held his arms tight around himself and frowned. "They'll see," he thought. "They'll see." "I'm going to be next," said Lee, leaning over the railing and staring at the light board. "I know it." "I'm going to be next," said Kiba, when he heard Lee. He stepped to the railing and stared as well. "No, me, I'm next," shouted Naruto, practically jumping in place. Hate nodded to the shinobi manning the board, who activated the randomizer and displayed the next match on the screen. The three boys at the railing wailed in disappointment. "Kankuro and Dosu, come down please." The others watched as the two contestants jumped to the arena floor and moved forward to the starting positions. Dosu was first to arrive, the feathery straw raincoat on his back rustling slightly with each step. His slouched posture, combined with that raincoat, gave him a hunched, bestial appearance, and the glare in his one visible eye did little to dispel that image. Kankuro made quite a contrast with his opponent. Clothed in a simplistic black jumpsuit with a matching hood, he had a very bland appearance, save for two things: the large, bandage-wrapped bundle on his back, and the sharp, angular pattern marked on his face in purple paint. He stood straight and tall, his bearing proud, and he had an easy smile on his face. Hate called for the match to begin, but neither combatant made a move. They stood in position, staring into each other's eyes. After several seconds, Naruto frowned. "Why aren't they doing anything?" he asked himself. "They're sizing each other up," said Kakashi, as he and Sasuke joined the others at the rail to watch. Kakashi leaned forward, perfectly mimicking Naruto's own posture. Sasuke smirked and did the same, waiting to see if Naruto caught it. His teammate immediately changed positions, but Sasuke couldn't tell if it was deliberate or not. Eventually, both of the combatants seemed to relax, affecting a casual air. "Nice makeup," said Dosu, his voice deep and smooth. "Did your mother apply it?" Kankuro's smile did not fade or change, remaining just as it was since his match was called. "Nice face," he said in immediate reply, his voice light and cheerful. "Did your father teach you to hide it?" They returned to their staring contest without another word. "Why don't they do something?" said Lee after a few moments. Kakashi looked at him, and was pleased to see the boy was confused instead of anxious for action. Confusion could be solved with insight, after all. A taste for action, however, was often a fatal flaw, and one he was worried the young man may have picked up from Guy, who was the same way in his youth. "What you see," came the voice of Guy as he joined them at the railing, "is a true shinobi battle in action." He had no youthful enthusiasm in his voice, only a simple and calm certainty, as solid as a rock, and the moment he spoke, Lee had a small notepad and pencil in hand. "When two shinobi meet on a battlefield, It is rare for the battle to end with only a single thrown kunai or flashy jutsu. They must fight and work to determine their foes' strengths and weaknesses, so they know when and how to strike to achieve victory. And at a time like this, when two cautious foes face each other, there are often times when they will stop fighting and plan. Sometimes, Kakashi cut in, still watching the two contestants. A shinobi will trash talk, or even simply converse with their foe, and you may get the impression they are having fun or feel so confident that they can do so. But any good shinobi will take that time to watch for hints on how to fight. Naruto, based off what you have seen so far, what sort of abilities or traits do you think the one with the raincoat has? Naruto looked Dosu up and down carefully. Well, I already know he has that metal thing on his arm. But he keeps both of his arms covered, which means he might have another trick up his other sleeve. He turned and looked at Kakashi, who nodded encouragingly, and waved his hand for Naruto to continue. He returned to looking at Dosu, putting his relatively weak observational skills to use. He looks thin, so his abilities probably don't rely on physical strength. He has a raincoat, so he either uses water technique or possibly wants others to think he does. That's about it for me. Kakashi gave him a pat on the shoulder. Not bad, he said, but we'll have to get you some practice sometime. Sasuke, what about the black one? Sasuke had expected this, and had been watching carefully while Naruto was talking, his Sharingan active to take in as much detail as possible. He's not in the best of shape, so he's probably not a taijutsu master, and probably avoids it when possible. The giant bandage wrap thing on his back must be important to him, if he bothers to carry it into combat, and I can see some odd chakra flowing between it and him. A weapon, I assume. And I assume he's already performed some sort of replacement technique. Why? Asked Kakashi. His face looks fake. When he talks, his lips and muscles are not moving properly, and I think he's keeping the same smile on his face to minimize those movements. It's not a bunshin, I can tell those apart. I'm assuming he replaced himself with something. Cheating Sharingan eyes, mumbled Naruto, drawing a smirk out of Kakashi and Sasuke both. Eventually, it was Dosu who made the first move. He charged and swung his arm with the metal resonator on it in a wide arc, deliberately swinging short of his foe as he had with Naruto. But Kankuro didn't flinch or otherwise react meaningfully. Dosu's eye narrowed and he took another swing, only for the black-clad boy to latch on to the resonator with both arms, making a loud wooden clatter as he did so. Surprise, said Kankuro, before his mouth opened unnaturally wide. He started to shoot Saban out of his mouth, but Dosu had already hit the release on his resonator and was jumping back, lunging frantically to the side as Kankuro's head twisted unnaturally to follow him, spitting Saban at an amazing rate. Eventually, the flow of needles stopped, although a clicking noise could be heard in his mouth for a moment before whatever mechanism that shot the Saban stopped as well. The bandages on the package loosened, revealing the real Kankuro, who had a far more sinister smile on his face. The fake Kankuro crouched defensively in front of him, his facial features now cracked and broken, revealing some sort of elaborate wooden puppet underneath. The real Kankuro moved his fingers slightly, and the puppet reached back and handed the resonator to its controller. Meet Karasu, my little kabuki puppet. He was examining the resonator in a very careful manner, although most of his attention remained on Dosu. Nice toy, he said, looking at the metal device. Unfortunately, I was paying attention when you used it back at the written exam. You should try something new. I am, Dosu said as he raised his hands in the snake seal, the one traditionally used for explosive tags. Kankuro threw the resonator away as hard as he could, and with a few more twitches of his fingers, he brought his puppet about to shield him from the blast. After a moment of silence, he let out a laugh, and moved his puppet to watch Dosu reattach the metal device to his forearm. I should have known, he said, shaking his head at his own error. That would be like blowing apart my puppet. I'd do it in a battle, but not for a match like this. Dosu finished attaching his resonator, checked its fittings, and then created two illusionary doubles. I'll give you credit, he said, and his voice had a slight bit of warmth to it. I did not expect to have to use any sort of ninjutsu in these matches. Still, you won't be rid of me so easy. He and his illusions crowded into one another, merging and then separating before starting to circle carefully a few feet out of Kankuro's reach. Kankuro did not spin with them, and did not seem inclined to try and figure out the real one. He simply allowed his puppet to drape over his shoulder, and waited. After a few moments, all three copies of Dosu lunged forward, but before they could reach their target, Kankuro's puppet opened its mouth and dropped a small sphere that exploded into a smoke screen. Dosu pressed his attack, lunging into the cloud of billowing smoke. The observers heard the sound of the puppet launching Saban, and a flurry of needles flew out of the cloud in several directions. There was a moment of silence, Then the cloud dispersed, revealing Kankuro laying on the ground beneath his puppet. The puppet was leaning forward with both arms swept back and its face towards Dosu, who was covered in needles. He took a step forward, then dropped to his knees. How? He managed to ask as he struggled to move. Kankuro stood and dusted himself off. I assumed you would attack from behind. Everyone does. So I set Karasa's main weapon to fire directly behind my previous position, and some secondary ones at the locations of your bunshin, just in case. The poison is paralytic, by the way. It's over. Hate landed next to Dosu and nudged him, sending the genin slumping to the floor. He turned to the Hokage and said, Winner, Kankuro. Kakashi nodded to himself up on the stands while medics came to get Dosu, then turned to his students. A few lessons from this. Never attack from directly behind a shinobi, because they will be expecting it. Never limit yourself to a single type of attack or technique. And when your opponent does something unexpected, assume it is a trap and evade. Sure, you'll look silly jumping around if they don't attack, but dead people can't be embarrassed. But won't a good opponent expect you to never attack from behind? Sakura asked from where she had settled earlier. Kakashi smiled. That's the poison chalice puzzle. His genin looked confused, so he walked over and sat down next to Sakura, waving the other two over as he did so. Reaching into his pouch, he pulled out 2 slips of paper and held them up. Pretend that we decided to test our wits against one another. One is an exploding tag. One is a fake. We must both pick one, place it on our head, and then a third party will activate it. We are certain that only one is explosive. We are certain the third party is neutral. He turned away for a moment, scribbling on one of the papers, then turned back and set one down in front of himself, and the other in front of Sakura. Which one is the real tag? All 3 genin stared at the slips of paper. Sasuke was the first to look away, shaking his head. Sakura did so shortly after, palming her face as she did so. Naruto pointed at the one in front of Kakashi and grinned. Why that one, Naruto? You're tricky, sensei. You know that I will assume you gave me the poisoned one, and assumed I would take the one in front of you. Naruto crossed his arms and grinned. Kakashi smirked and nodded his head. Sure. But how do you know I am not expecting you to assume the one in front of me is real, and thus actually give you the real one? As you said, I am tricky. Naruto made what he probably thought was a serious thinking face, then pointed at the tag in front of him. That one, he said, with utmost certainty. Kakashi reached over and hovered his hand just above the tag. Sakura grinned at Naruto, not a sweet and friendly grin, but a grin with teeth. But Naruto, how do you know he doesn't know you know? He might be expecting you to know this, and thus gave himself the tag, expecting you to assume a single layer of trickery is not enough. Before Naruto could reply, Sasuke gave him a light slap in the back of the head. It's an infinite loop, dope. You can never be certain what your foe knows. In your case, you can probably never be certain what you know either. Sasuke ducked Naruto's fist with a laugh and watched his friend fume. The thought rolled around in Sasuke's mind for a moment before settling. Yeah, I suppose he is my friend. Sasuke was not the friendly type. He understood the concept, but until this very moment, he didn't really understand what it was. As a child, his friends had all been family members, some close, some distant. They were different. They were family. Sasuke had always figured that being friends was a decision, made deliberately, a sort of social contract to remain neutral with each other, but what he felt now was the same as he once felt for his cousin, who used to play catch with him, or his uncle, who used to tell him stories on rainy days. Then he felt a chill run through him, remembering what had happened to his past friends. He realized, standing in the middle of the exam, watching Naruto argue game theory with Kakashi, that friendship meant one thing to him: loss. Because in the end, he would lose his friend. It might be in combat, a kunai in the dark, or a fiery jutsu. It might be to an illness, a slow and painful decline. It might just be of old age, when their bodies simply stopped working. But someday, he'd lose his friend, just like he lost. He started slightly, and looked up to see Sakura standing next to him, a hand on his shoulder. Are you okay? She asked, frowning slightly. You suddenly went quiet and kind of shut off for a moment. Had me a little worried. Even Kiri, perched on her shoulder, looked concerned. Something strange took hold of him then. He found that he didn't want to keep his thoughts to himself for once. He wanted her input, valued it even, because surely it was something she had faced as well. He swallowed painfully through the knot in his throat, and in a quiet voice he asked, How do you face the eventual loss of a friend? I just realized, someday, all friendship ends. How can I make more bonds, knowing how it will hurt to lose them? Sakura shrugged. I can't answer that for you. But as for myself, She watched Kakashi and Naruto arguing even harder after the blonde found out that both slips of paper had been marked as traps with a fond smile. I think, faced with an inevitable loss, the goal becomes to get as much out of the deal as you can. In a fight. In relationships. In life itself. Get what you can, while you can, and enjoy it. Kiri chose that moment to meow from her place on Sakura's shoulder, then jumped down and began rubbing against Sasuke's leg. He leaned down and idly scratched the cat's back, getting a pleasant purr from it. She's a cat, Sasuke. She'll live 15 years at best, assuming nothing happens to her on duty. Should I flinch away from her, knowing I'll almost certainly lose her someday? Sakura leaned down and scooped up her cat, then flipped it upside down and burrowed her face in its tummy, making little muffled growling noises while Kiri half-heartedly grumbled and batted at the girl's pink hair. Sakura pulled her face back and gave Kiri a kiss on the nose, saying, "But then I'd miss this fuzzy little tummy." All the attention caused the cat to flop back in her arms and start purring again. Kakashi and Naruto suddenly stopped arguing and looked at the announcement board, and then at Sasuke. Naruto had a huge smirk on his face, but Kakashi looked alarmed. Sakura looked up at the board before Sasuke could, then grinned cheerfully. "Looks like you're up, Sasuke. And get your game face on, it's going to be tough." Sasuke looked up at the board and felt a moment of dread. I just know this is going to turn into some sort of battle for her fair maiden blossom or something stupid. Uchiha Sasuke, Rock Lee, please come down for your match. YOSH. I shall fight Uchiha San for the right to protect the fair maiden Sakura. Damn. Chapter 28, Honor and Blood. Sasuke vs. Lee. Sasuke chose to take the stairs down to the arena floor. He was more than capable of jumping the distance, as Lee did moments after the match was called, but a few moments to plan and prepare would be useful. Sakura had told him a little about Lee after she rejoined his group at the tower, and Sasuke had to admit to himself that he was quite nervous at facing down a taijutsu powerhouse, even if Lee could not use ninjutsu or genjutsu. The stories Naruto told of his time training with Guy and Lee did not help any either. But he was not without his own abilities, hard-learned and hard-trained. He had his tools. He had his training. He had his mind. He only needed to use them the right way, and he could win. So he walked down the stairs slowly, thinking carefully, and by the time he reached the bottom step, he was already reaching into his pouch and retrieving a pair of lightweight goggles, tinted slightly red. By his first step on the arena floor, he was lightly fingering the various orbs, flasks, and tags on his person, checking the dots and scratches he placed on them for identification. One more step, and his smile was back in place. I got this. Lee was already waiting on the floor, standing at the ready, one hand forward and a cheerful smile on his face. Yosh! I am ready for our youthful battle, Sasuke-san! I will defeat you with my hard work, so others may know how hard they must work to earn the right to try and woo Sakura-chan. Up on the observation platform, Sakura palmed her face, trying to cover the faint blush slowly creeping its way across her cheeks. Based on the glances and laughter she got, she was only partially successful. I am going to need to talk to Lee about this, she thought to herself. Sasuke managed a cheerful smirk while checking the fit on his goggles and slipping them on. As you like, Lee. He stepped forward and offered a fist. No hard feelings? Lee grinned and stepped forward to bump fists. There are never hard feelings, when two opponents give all on the field of battle. He backed up and returned to his ready stance. Sasuke stepped back as well, and beneath his goggles, his eyes turned red. Hate stepped back and raised his hand. Begin, he said, jumping away as he did so. Lee wasted no time. The moment Hate moved away, he was charging across the floor, his poise and form perfect, his speed incredible. But it still took time for him to run that distance, and in that time, Sasuke had already reached into his pouch and dropped the small sphere he had felt for earlier. It exploded into a cloud of smoke, thick and gray. Sasuke ducked and tumbled slightly to the side as Lee continued through the smoke in a single bound, scything through the spot Sasuke had been standing with a whirlwind kick that parted the cloud for a moment before it resettled. The green-clad genin landed on the other side of the cloud and turned to face it. His smile had not faded in the least, and he took his same starting position as always. You think you can hide in that smoke, Sasuke-kun? You will find that I am not so easy to fool. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a length of black silk, which he quickly tied over his eyes before returning to his stance. Sasuke, watching Lee's chakra through the smoke screen, smiled and quietly pulled another sphere out of his pouch, this one significantly larger and made of metal with a single button on the top. He crouched, carefully positioning his feet as quietly as he could, before he deliberately scraped one of his feet across the ground, so lightly as to be nearly, but not quite, inaudible. Lee turned his head slightly at that lightest of sounds and dashed into the smoke, spinning into another kick and hitting nothing but air. He turned his head back and forth, breathing silently, and when he heard another scrape behind him, he did not hesitate, delivering a jump kick that made the air whistle in its passing. With each sound came a fresh attack, delivered with careful and impeccable form and precision. Sasuke watched each attack carefully with his Sharingan, observing his foe's every move. He pulled out a kunai and lightly tossed it to one side, and Lee promptly attacked that area with flying kick, then stopped where he was to listen carefully in the smoke. A shuriken, tossed lightly in the other direction, had the same result. Finally, he pressed the button on the metal orb and tossed it just out of his reach. It landed with a thump, skidding slightly but not rolling. In moments, Lee was there, nudging the sphere with his foot, a curious look on his face. "You might have made it if you had not stopped in place, Lee." Lee spun in place, arms raised, ready to defend himself, but Sasuke only stepped back slightly. He made no effort to keep his footsteps silent, and Lee charged immediately. He only made it 3 steps before he stumbled, his legs pinwheeling slightly before he crashed into the ground and slid to a stop near Sasuke's feet. Sasuke shook his head and knelt down next to Lee, who was laying in a heap. "The sphere had a numbing agent. It won't hurt you, but you're not going any dash." Sasuke's jaw snapped shut as Lee's fist smashed into it, sending Sasuke tumbling out of the smoke cloud, skidding and bouncing across the floor before he fetched up against the wall. He looked into the cloud, then his eyes widened as he rolled to one side just in time to avoid a crushing knee drop from Lee that cracked the cement floor. Lee stood smoothly with his back still to Sasuke, although Sasuke's Sharingan eyes could make out a tiny amount of hesitancy in his motions. "A mere numbing agent will not stop me, Sasuke-san. It is true, I cannot feel my body, but I know my body through years of training." He turned and entered his starting stance, a broad smile on his face as he removed his blindfold. "I do not need to feel my body to control it." Sasuke was no fool. He knew he was good at taijutsu, very good at it compared to most genin, but Lee had focused entirely on taijutsu alone. It would have been the height of arrogance for him to assume he was better at it than his opponent. The moment Lee began to charge at him, Sasuke was backing off, exhaling a cloud of fire as he did so. He had no reason to believe the cloud would deter Lee much, and in that way avoided disappointment when Lee dodged around the fireball. The fight quickly devolved into a game of keep away, Sasuke relying on his fireballs to shield him from attack even as Lee used his speed to avoid the fire and tried to move in. Unfortunately, that stalemate could not last long. With each cloud of fire, Sasuke's chakra reserve dwindled, but Lee lost little of his strength as he dodged around them. In a fight of endurance, Sasuke would lose. Sasuke made another set of hand seals, then inhaled deeply, holding his breath for the right moment and letting the chakra flow into his chest. When Lee charged forward, he exhaled again, but this time he spit out a thin stream of fire, just as he had when Haku had tried to trap him. He aimed the stream slightly lower than he normally would, worried about possibly killing Lee, but Lee jumped away, sailing over Sasuke and landing with a quick roll before righting himself and rushing to one side. Sasuke followed Lee's frantic moves, trying to tag him in the legs to end the match, but Lee was no slouch when it came to evasion. He was effective in his dodging, taking advantage of Sasuke's limited movement. Any time Sasuke's plasma lance came close to his legs, the boy would leap into a wildly different direction, forcing Sasuke to spend effort redirecting the stream. Sasuke continued to exhale his technique until spots began to dance in front of his eyes, then let it end and took a quick, gulping breath. Lee lunged forward, darting in to finish the fight, but Sasuke quickly exhaled an enveloping breath of fire directly in front of himself, spinning around to cover all directions in a giant burning cloud with what little breath he had managed to take. He finished, and caught sight of Lee landing on the statue. The boy was laughing cheerfully and reaching down for his ankles, yelling, "I can't believe it! Finally!" Sasuke felt a chill down his spine as Lee pulled off a pair of training weights and held them out. Naruto had told him about his own training sword and how it worked, and he was not surprised when the weights hit the ground hard enough to leave a small pair of craters. Sasuke knew he had only moments to act. He dipped both of his hands deep into his pockets and pulled them out, clutching 2 fists full of his enhanced dust. Lee jumped from his perch and landed in a deep crouch, mere feet from Sasuke, who was already raising both arms in an overhand throw. He released the right handful of dust at Lee, who lunged forward, and then vanished in a blur, barely visible even with Sasuke's Sharingan. But even as Lee vanished, Sasuke's left arm continued downward, still carrying the paralytic dust, and with a quick flick, Sasuke tossed it directly behind himself, scattering it as widely as he could. Lee was not a Sannin, and did not have any special resistance to the poison. The moment he hit the glittering cloud, his body spasmed, turning his powerful charge into a powerful and painful tumble. He crashed into Sasuke's back hard enough to make both of their teeth rattle, and sending them both tumbling part way across the arena. When they rolled to a stop, Sasuke picked himself up and checked on Lee, who was twitching violently on the ground. Even paralysis can barely hold him, Sasuke thought. Sweet Kami, what a beast! He pulled out a kunai and held it to Lee's throat, even if his arm was shaking after the hit. It's over, Lee. Stop shaking and let them call it. Lee continued to fight for several moments before he finally lay still, a deep sigh escaping between his lips. Hate jumped down to them and had a quick look, then nodded and turned to the observers. Winner, Uchiha Sasuke. Sasuke was slightly surprised at the cheers he got from Sakura and Naruto, and he saw Shino give him a nod from the railing. The other Konoha shinobi were either smiling or cheering. Even Guy seemed enthused about the match, in spite of his student's loss. A thought crossed Sasuke's mind, a sudden moment of pity. He was surprised to find that he did not feel the pity out of disdain, but out of respect. Lee might have crushed any number of foes with his obvious speed and strength, and only had the bad luck of being picked against someone who had the tools to defeat him. It felt wrong, in a way, for someone so obviously strong to fall to nothing worse than bad luck. Wait, he said as the medics came out to tend to Lee. He dug into his hip pouch, then pulled out a small vial and handed it to one of them. Antidote, he grunted. He should be fine in a few minutes after he gets this, unless he got hurt in the tumble. He turned to Lee and crouched down to pat him on the shoulder. If Kakashi had not discussed that exact scenario with me and my team before our match, you probably would have crushed me in a few more moments. I need some taijutsu practice, and I would enjoy testing myself against you again. Lee managed to force a shaky smile, and after a moment, his thumb came up, even if he couldn't get his arm up with it. He stood, and saw Guy giving him the same thumbs up, this time accompanied by a youthful pose, while behind him, Kakashi clapped slowly, his one visible eye filled with warmth. Naruto was grinning at him cheerfully, and Sakura was right there with him, smiling at him with her eyes alight. For a moment, he was not Uchiha Sasuke, Avenger, tasked with slaying the last of his kin. He was just Sasuke, Genin, who had won a tough battle and earned the respect of others. He breathed deep and allowed himself a smile. It felt good. Team 7 was quite loud in their celebrations when Sasuke arrived, but that good cheer died when the next match was announced. Gaara Zaku, please come down for your match. Gaara vanished from his place by his team and reappeared on the floor in a swirl of sand, his face blank, almost disinterested. His plain black clothes were unmoved by his arrival, and his thin shoulders were unbowed by the obvious weight of the huge gourd on his back. Zaku, meanwhile, jumped down from the platforms with a smirk on his face and a swagger in his step. He wore a brown shirt, with the kanji for death scrawled down the front 3 times. Poor little guy, said Zaku, running a hand through the black tuft of hair that sprouted from his headband. Stuck fighting a real shinobi from the only village worth a damn. You're probably gonna die, little fellow, unless you want to give up. Gaara only gave Zaku a frightening smile, one full of teeth, his eyes shining with an odd inner light. Zaku's grin faltered for a moment, then came back full force. Hey, I gave you a chance, he said with a shrug. Don't go crying to your mama when I spank you then, kid. I'll talk to her before then, said Gaara, his smile not moving in the least. Hade held up his hand, then let it drop. Begin! Zaku laughed cheerfully as he raised his hands, palms pointing at Gaara to reveal 2 holes leading into his arms. Die! He shouted, pushing a blast of chakra-laced air out of the holes. A nearly invisible distortion of air lanced out, blowing dust into a great cloud and engulfing Gaara. Zaku's laughter reached even greater heights as he pushed harder, slashing into the dust cloud and the barely visible figure of Gaara within. Die! He finally released the jutsu, chuckling as the dust slowly settled, but his humor was short-lived. As the dust fell out of the air, it revealed Gaara, standing just as immobile and emotionless as before. The only indication that he noticed the attack was the thick umbrella of sand that was slowly dropping to the ground. I see, said Gaara with a cold tone of voice. You are like me. You want to prove your existence by ending my life, just as I look to do the same with yours. His smile was cold but genuine as he raised both of his hands and pointed them at Zaku. Allow me to show you how helpless you really are. The sand that had been floating beside Gaara lunged forward, its oddly flowing form spreading into a vague clawed shape as it reached for Zaku. Zaku shouted and jumped away, pushing as hard as he could with his chakra and riding the back blast from his arms to speed his escape. He landed 20 feet away with a surprised look on his face as he watched the arm of sand return to its controller. Then Zaku started to laugh again. I guess you're right, little Genin. I do want to kill you. I want to prove my strength. I want everyone to know how strong I am. He howled at the ceiling, raising his arms and screaming his fury. I'll never roll over and call myself weak again. Not for you, not for those pussies up there watching, not for the damned Hokage himself. The room cooled significantly at those words, and more than a few of the other observers glanced at the Hokage, who to his credit did not glare or otherwise react beyond a small smile at being dismissed by a genin. Even the others from Suna looked unhappy at the words. In the shinobi world, you can hate your foe with all your heart, but you did not insult such a long-lived and powerful one casually. The other genin from Otogekyo did not agree, however, because they both laughed loudly at their teammate's comment. Zaka continued to laugh as he raised his arms and sent another, stronger blast at Gaara, one strong enough to blow away any dust he might have stirred and revealing Gaara's sand in action. It moved without any real effort from the Suna genin, forming a solid shield between the two of them and deflecting the twin blasts of air with its bulk. Then Zaka rotated his wrist slightly, pulling his palms closer together. The twin streams of air combined and focused, and a single small area of the sand shield started to divot under the pressure. Sand began to blow out of the divot at an alarming rate, scattering across the arena. Hide all you want behind your sand, snarled Zaku. It won't save you. I'll carve my way straight through. Zaku wavered for a moment when the laughter started. It was a low and deep chuckle that made chills run down his spine. A sound born of sand that had been blown away from the shield started to stream back to it, reinforcing it even as more sand blew away. The shield of sand then began to advance slowly towards Zaku, and no matter how he focused on it, he found he could not push it back. Yes, said Gaara, slowly walking forward behind his shield. Push. Fight. Struggle. Put all of your energy and life into your futile attack. Prove my existence as I remove your own. Several tendrils of sand whipped out from behind the shield, sliding along the ground and lashing at Zaka's feet, forcing him to turn his palms down and use them to thrust away again. He snarled as he rose into the air, his fury written clearly within his eyes, then came to a sudden, jarring stop. He looked down and saw a fourth strand of sand clinging to his ankle like a tentacle, pulling him down. Zaka shouted and flailed, but the sand was irresistible, pulling him down to the ground, and to the waiting coils of the other tendrils of sand. Gaara raised his hands and the sand began to creep up Zaka's body slowly, clenching his limbs and torso painfully tight. Hey, he said with a chilling smile. I gave you a chance. Don't go crying to your mother when I spank you. His dull monotone turned the mockery on its head, from hot-blooded trash talk to a cold eulogy. He raised his hands fully, and the sand flowed up to cover Zaka's body completely. No, thought Zaka as the sand enveloped him, I will not die here. He pulled up as much chakra as he could manage, exhausting his reserves instantly, and focused it all into his arms, biting back a scream as the pressure within the sand skyrocketed. Gaara opened his mouth to call out his deadly attack, feeling a rush of warmth from the knowledge that it would be the last thing his foe ever heard, but with sudden and terrible force, the ball of sand exploded, sending Zaka flying across the arena. Zaka managed to roll to his feet as he skidded away, but it was a graceless act. His arms dangled at his side, shredded to the bone, and several gaping holes could be seen where his arms had simply popped. How often can you do that? Asked Gaara, slowly approaching the panting Oto genin. How many times can you blow apart your own limbs before all that is left is ragged meat and blood from other? He began to raise his hands again, and the sand coiled and whirled around it, reforming into countless tendrils. Zaka sighed and dropped to a knee and bowed his head in submission. He had no reserves and no functioning arms or hands, and he had been taught carefully the difference between betting his life and committing suicide. I bring no value to my village dying here. I yield, he said quietly. I can't defeat you, yet. I do not accept. Zaku's head snapped up as Gaara's sand rushed at him, but he was not fast enough to escape its grip. The sand lunged at him, one huge mass, a wave of unstoppable earth. Gaara laughed as his sand flowed, until the sound of his voice was drowned out by a keening whistle, and Hayate's sword sliced neatly through the wave of sand. The sand crumbled when it was bisected, then regathered itself at Gaara's feet. The match is over, said Hayate, and he did not cough or breathe shallowly as he spoke. He was in full control of himself, if only for a few moments, and in those moments, he had power. If you try to continue, you will forfeit. And if you still try to continue, I will slay you. Gaara smiled. So others have said? I am here, and they are not. I will kill you too, Proctor. And will you kill me? Called out Sarutobi Hiruzen, taking a single step towards the distant genin, his hands still folded neatly. His face, however, was set in a grim manner, and his eyes gleamed with dangerous power. Do you think you can also slay the third Hokage, god of shinobi? Will you try, for the sake of slaying some lowly genin? Hiruzen smiled, and it was not a friendly or charitable smile. Be careful, lest you draw the attention of others who would prove their worth to you. Gaara froze in a rare moment of indecision, before he gave the older man a stiff nod and his sand withdrew into his gourd. He walked to the stairs in silence, and up the stairs in silence, and across the platform in silence, ignoring each glare and frightened glance he received from the others, until he returned to his family and sat on the bench, in silence. And in that silence, he could almost hear their thoughts about him. Madness. Danger. Fear. It was almost enough to make him smile. "I'll feed you soon, mother," he whispered quietly to himself. Sakura shivered as Gaara sat in his place with his team. She was quite an observant young woman, and she noticed how the boy's own team leaned away from him as he approached. Even his own team feared him. Those thoughts were banished when she saw the next match flash on the board, and she shot a nervous glance at her best friend, biting her lips slightly as she did so. Ino still looked so tired and withdrawn, even days after the forest, and for a moment, Sakura had to fight the urge to tell her to yield and spare herself, because her foes certainly looked like they knew how to fight. She opened her mouth, then shut it as Ino shot a glance at her. As worn down as she looked, something in Ino's eyes sparkled, and she straightened herself as she stood, a little steel sliding into her spine. Hate called out clearly for all to hear. "Yamanaka Ino, Temari, please come down for your match." Chapter 29, Wit vs. Chaos. A Battle of Minds. Temari laughed when she saw the bedraggled creature that was her foe. The blonde girl was almost a mockery of what Temari had been taught made a good kunoichi, and contrasted sharply with her own appearance. Ino's hair was long and luxurious, running down to her hips, while Temari kept hers in a series of short bobs. Ino's arms and legs had no definition, showed no sign of hard work at all, while Temari's frame was well filled with lean muscle. Ino had any number of loose articles of clothing to grab and control her with, while Temari's outfit was carefully tailored to remain close to her skin and much harder to grab. Temari laughed, because she was facing a joke. The only saving grace she saw in Ino was the look in the girl's eyes. She expected Ino to be catty, full of false bravado, or maybe friendly, trying to soften the blow of her inevitable loss. But when the girl looked at Temari, it was a cold and calculating stare, and Temari felt a touch of respect. The girl was ill-prepared for the Chunin exams, but she looked like she knew it. She still had no chance against Temari, but she might make a good kunoichi someday. Temari drew her weapon from her back, a 4-foot fan made of steel with a paper cover. She slapped the end of the handle on the ground and let it unfurl slightly, revealing a single large purple dot on the otherwise white fan. "I will need only a single moon to defeat you. Feel proud, kunoichi. If it were not for the look in your eyes, I wouldn't even give you that much credit." Ino did not look away, nor did she say anything. She studied Temari carefully during her entire speech, then nodded to Hate to indicate she was ready. Shikamaru sighed from his place on the balcony as he leaned on the railing. "This match is going to be troublesome," he said quietly to himself. To his surprise, Sakura noticed his grumbles, and leaned on the rail next to him. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad," he replied. "The three of us are specialists. We focus on our clan techniques, and use them as a group to control the battlefield." He let out another sigh as Hate jumped away. Ino threw a kunai at Temari, who swung her fan and casually knocked the blade away with a gust of wind. "But what we don't have is a lot of one-on-one stopping power. Choji has most of our strength. And Ino has it worse, because her clan technique is slow-moving and ranged." Ino was jumping around the arena, avoiding further blasts of wind from Temari. From the look on the Tsunagenin's face, Ino was doing a much better job at dodging than Temari had expected. But Ino already looked winded, her poor physical conditioning starting to make itself known. From time to time, she would toss another kunai or two, and Temari would dutifully blow those away too. "Does she have any hope?" asked Sakura, watching the somewhat one-sided fight with a concerned frown. Shikamaru seemed to shrink slightly into himself as he pressed his fingers and thumbs together and crouched slightly. He shut his eyes and for a moment he went silent and still. Eventually he relaxed and returned to his previous slouch on the railing, continuing talking as if he had never paused. "She has a nominal loadout for an on-duty shinobi. Kunai, a few feet of wire, a few smoke pellets, ration bars, iodine drops. She has her clan technique, which is almost a certain win if she can hit with it, and the Academy standard techniques. I can think of a few things she can do to set up a win. My concern is if she will think of any before it's too late. She's down to her last kunai already." On the floor, Ino was holding on to a single kunai held in both hands and was panting heavily as sweat rolled down her face. Temari had yet to move any meaningful distance, and was standing at rest, her fan held to her left side, ready to swing. The Tsunagenin was breathing evenly, without a drop of sweat or hair out of place. "Hardly impressive," she said with a nasty grin. Lots of sweat and puffing, all to throw a few useless kunai. Maybe you should yield now and save yourself the trouble. For the first time, Ino smiled, and her voice was lighter than it had been since the forest. And Sasuke. Nothing wrong with getting a feel for your opponent, even one as mouthy as you. She struck a victory pose, one hand behind her back and one arm forward with fingers extended into a V shape. She was smiling cheerfully as she shouted out, "I've got you now, bushy hair!" The smoke pellets from her pouch, every one of them, dropped from the hand behind her back and exploded into a disgustingly thick cloud of smoke. Temari laughed and then swung her fan from left to right, blowing it back, but between the tight confines of the room and the sheer thickness of the smoke, she was unable to dissipate it completely. It was pushed back enough to reveal Ino, who was charging at Temari with her kunai in hand and a focused glare. Something felt wrong about the situation to Temari, and it took her a moment to figure it out. She didn't move when I blew back the smoke. Temari was no lightweight when it came to her wind jutsu. A skinny thing like Ino should have at least been blown off balance. To see her charging and unmoved implied something was up, and only a cursory glance told Temari that the Ino in front of her was a harmless illusion. But where could she be? Temari smiled a nasty grin. She had been paying attention to the previous fight, and she knew this trick. Temari used the weight and momentum of her fan, still coming to rest after her last blast of wind, to spin quickly to her right and spotted the real Ino attacking from behind and getting close. Not nearly good enough, she shouted, continuing her previous spin and sending another powerful blast of air at the girl. The air passed through Ino without even ruffling her hair, and Temari cursed herself mentally. Who would try the same trick mere minutes after we both saw it? She continued to turn to her right, sacrificing power for speed as she realized her back was to her foe, and completed the turn to see Ino almost within reach. Temari swung her fan as hard and fast as possible at Ino's face. Ino was already dropping into a roll by the time Temari had fully turned. She tumbled under the fan, the wind from its passing shredding a few strands of loose hair, and came up within Temari's guard, both arms lashing straight out in a desperate strike. Temari flinched back slightly, and Ino's hit only managed to ruffle cloth. Temari raised her fan up for a downward strike with a laugh, then stopped when Ino slumped to the ground. Temari lowered the fan, setting it on the ground, then stepped forward and nudged Ino with her foot, turning her over. The girl was covered in bruises and minor abrasions from her efforts, and her skin was filthy from the thick smoke, but she had a huge smile on her face. "Pathetic," said Temari, looking at her fallen foe. Temari stepped back, almost to the edge of the arena, then turned around to face the wall, and raised her hand. "I give up," she shouted clearly. In the stands, Shikamaru smirked. "When you have a slow attack," he said quietly to Sakura, who was staring open-mouthed at the two girls below, "you have to make your foe stand still, or get so close it doesn't matter." Temari slumped for a moment, then whirled, her face going red as Ino pulled herself up, still panting. She shot Temari a grim smile as she stood, propping herself up with her hands on her knees. "You don't dodge," she said, slowly straightening. "You never once dodged, even though you could have easily avoided some of my kunai with a simple step to the side. You use your fan as a shield, and when I got inside your shield, your habit of immobility betrayed you." She let out a harsh sigh and turned to Hate, who was walking forward and calling Ino the winner of the match. "I give up too." Hate froze, and a single eyebrow rose slightly, although the image was ruined when another cough made his cheeks blow out for a moment. Along the balconies, there was only silence, even amongst the Suna team. Only two other figures reacted physically to the declaration. Her Jonin teacher, Sarutobi Asuma, groaned and ran a palm over his face. And his father, the Hokage, smiled discreetly. Ino bowed deeply to Asuma. "I am not fit for the rank of Chunin. I have no experience with leadership, I have little ability beyond my clan techniques, and I have not put forth the effort needed to survive in the real world of the shinobi." She bowed to the Hokage, and if anything, her bow was deeper than before. "I asked your forgiveness, Hokage-sama, for so poorly representing Konohagakure." Hiruzen stepped forward on his platform, then gave her a short and respectful bow. When he rose, he was smiling. "You put the duties of the Chunin rank and the needs of the village ahead of personal prestige and advancement. I only wish every Konoha shinobi represented this village so well." Ino rose with a cheerful smile on her face. But the Hokage was no longer smiling, instead frowning and looking beyond her. She heard Sakura and several others shout from the stands, and she felt a jolt of adrenaline as she turned to see Temari behind her, fan folded tight and already moving on an intercept course for her head. In an adrenaline-fueled slow motion, Ino realized she could never dodge in time, even as she started to step back and raise her arms to defend herself. Then Temari's fan exploded, tiny pieces of steel sprang across the arena, slashing into Ino's face and arms. She finished her step back to see Temari's own Jonin standing in front of her, one hand holding half of Temari's fan, the other half held out in the air in front of him, where a significant portion of the fan had exploded at his touch. He wore a cloth shroud over half of his face, but the other half looked thunderous, and his glare was directed only at Temari, who was standing with the remaining stub of her fan still extended. "Baki!" she shouted at him, tossing the remains of the fan to the ground. "Why the hell did you do that?" Baki dropped the other half he was carrying and crossed his arms. "You lost," he said, his voice deep and rough as if his throat had been damaged in the past, which only enhanced the menace in his voice. "Attacking a foe after you have lost the match dishonors your father's name, your village's name, my name as your sensei, and last and in this case certainly least, your name." He nudged the tattered iron fan with his foot and gave her a cool smile. "You will have time to reflect on this over the weeks it will take to rebuild your fan. And it will take weeks, because you, personally, will handle every part of that construction. You will carve the wooden case by hand. You will create the molds for the blades, one at a time, and destroy them after each use, creating only one blade per mold. You will mine the iron ore from the earth, and you will smelt it yourself to rid it of impurities. And before any of that, you will explain this to your father, and do any additional tasks he assigns you. And until all of this is done, you will not take any mission on behalf of Sunagakure, not even the lowliest of D ranks." He turned as Temari snarled behind him and bowed to the Hokage, his bearing showing nothing but respect. "Apologies, Hokage-sama. This is the second of my genin to attack after a match has ended, and while Gaara has problems that make him difficult to control, Temari has no excuse." Hiruzen nodded in acknowledgement, and Baki jumped back to his place on the platforms without another word. The medics arrived and started to encourage Ino to come with them, already dabbing at a few of the cuts she had sustained when the fan exploded, but she stopped when Temari called out to her. She turned to see Temari standing there, her eyes shining as she blinked back her tears. "If you were going to quit," Temari shouted, as a single tear of heated shame finally escaped and ran down her face. "Why did you compete? Why did you rob me of my chance?" Ino shook her head and gave Temari a tired grin. "I was going to quit. Then you mouthed off, and I figured I'd make you earn your win before I gave up. Then you kept mouthing off after I ran out of kunai, and in the time you gave me with your smarmy words, I figured out how to crush you. Every time you opened your mouth, I decided I could go a little further, try a little harder. In a way, I couldn't have done it without you." She shrugged and started to follow the medics, waving her hand lazily behind her as she did so. "Next time," she called out cheerfully. "Maybe you should just shut up, you cranky bitch." Naruto was rubbing his hands together and staring at the board when Sakura wandered back to her team. She shot him a look, then turned to Sasuke, who rolled his eyes. She then looked to Kakashi, who shook his head and turned away. "What are you doing?" she asked Naruto. The boy was practically dancing from foot to foot, and at the rate he was going, Sakura would not be terribly surprised if his stare caused the board to burst into spontaneous flame. "I know I'm next," said Naruto, letting out a faux evil chuckle. "I've been good, I've been patient, and we're running out of contestants. I'm going to be next. I can feel it in my very soul." He spread his arms and stepped towards the board slightly, shouting loud enough to be heard across the arena. "And the winner is..." The names popped up. "Monsieur Yoroi, come down please," said Hate, trying not to grin at the kid in orange who was having a screaming fit up on the platforms, struggling against the little pink-haired girl who had him in a headlock. Sasuke swallowed nervously, but he refused to look away. Monsieur and Yoroi were teammates. They were friends. How could they? They had exchanged banter before the match, and when Hate started the fight, they had both charged. Neither one tried to dodge or avoid the other. Yoroi held out his glowing blue hands and grabbed at Monsieur, even as Monsieur wrapped his suddenly flexible arms around Yoroi's chest and head. "That's silly of you, Monsieur," grunted Yoroi, wheezing slightly under the pressure of the headlock he was in. "You know I'll drain your chakra dry. Just by touching you, I will." Monsieur had smiled coldly at his teammate's words. His arms had flexed, and Yoroi had time for only a single, ghastly yelp as his neck cracked under the pressure. Monsieur let his former teammate's body slump to the floor, and his parting words to his dying friend were, "Not fast enough to win." How could he? How could he? Kakashi noticed Sasuke's distress and patted him on the back, steering the genin away to look at him. He looked at Sakura and Naruto, and felt a slight bit of pride at the fact that neither of them looked any better than Sasuke. Yoroi assumed he knew his foe's limits. He assumed he was safe. He lost from that assumption. He gave each of them a hard stare. "If you face each other in battle, I hope none of you would go so far. I believe none of you would go so far. But I never want any of you to make that assumption and leave your guard down. And if you do manage to willingly strike down your teammate. Kakashi stood, gazing down at them, allowing a little killing intent to fill his words with fury and darkness and death. If you strike down your friend, pray they strike you down at the same time, because if not, I'll kill you myself, and it will not be an easy death. He turned to watch Monsieur, who was standing over his kill, arms crossed, as if daring someone to object. Even the cold gaze of the Hokage did not faze him. Kakashi chuckled darkly and shook his head at the bravado. As for him, he might have won the fight, but he lost his future. What friend would risk themselves to come to his aid? What teammate would join him in a fight against a dangerous foe? Who would show him mercy on the battlefield? He's dead, he just doesn't know it yet. Kakashi leaned against the railing, his frame drooping slightly, and for just a moment, he looked like an old man, too tired to stand. Sasuke looked at his teammates, then walked over and joined Kakashi at the railing. If it comes to that, he said quietly, let me know, and I'll tag along. We'll make a field trip out of that mission. Kakashi looked at Sasuke, who managed to keep his face deadly serious for almost 5 seconds before one corner of his mouth ticked upward, and after a moment, Kakashi started to laugh. Ma, I get it, he said, waving his hands. Really? I can almost imagine what my old teammate would say. Kakashi-san, stop being so angsty. Kakashi-san, if you want, we can go get some hair dye and makeup after the mission, make you a proper goth-chan. He always was quick to give me shit when I got in a mood. He reached out and ruffled Sasuke's hair, getting a frown and a grumble from the Uchiha boy, who started tucking his hair back into place beneath the goggles he still had on his head. Kakashi felt a sudden pang of sorrow, of guilt, at the memory of his old friend, long gone. But he let it go, and focused on what was in front of him, not behind him. You know, he said, his one eye twinkling. You remind me of him a great deal. Remind me to tell you about Uchiha Obito when this is done, okay? Sasuke opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted when Naruto started cheering, as if he had already forgotten what he had seen. Sasuke looked towards the board and smiled. Naruto finally has his match. Uzumaki Naruto, Nara Shikamaru, please come down for your match. Naruto leaped from the balcony with a cheer that lasted all the way to the ground. He landed with a tuck and roll, bouncing to his feet and raising his arms like a prize fighter, circling in place and shouting indiscriminate self-praise to the world. He didn't hear the scoff from Kiba, the snort from Sakura, or the quiet encouragement from Hinata, and even if he had, he would not have reacted any differently. He was Uzumaki Naruto, and it was time for him to shine. He could already hear the calls of the crowd, feel the flutter of confetti as it fell around him after his stunning victory. He bowed, imagining himself receiving a medal from the Hokage as Sakura and Sasuke waited for their own, for second and third place, of course. You look like an idiot, said Shikamaru, trudging slowly past the bouncing blonde. Asuma, meanwhile, was walking over to Team 7's place with a huge grin plastered on his face. Hey, Kakashi, he called, lighting a cigarette with exaggerated motions. What do you say to double or nothing on this fight? I'll double my penalty if Shikamaru loses, against the original penalty of yours if he wins? Kakashi agreed with a curt nod, and Asuma laughed and pumped his fist. What's so funny? Asked Sakura, pressing her fist to her waist with a look of poorly constrained fury, Kiri hissing slightly at the jonin from her shoulder. Naruto's not the brightest. They turned as one to watch Naruto continue his preemptive strutting. But he's got a lot of guts and a lot of tricks. Asuma waved his hands amiably. I'm not saying he's not a good kid, and I bet he'd put quite a challenge to my other two genin, but Shikamaru is a tactical genius. Give him even the slightest chance to think, and he'll walk all over you. Then maybe you won't mind me joining in with a wager. Guy had wandered over as well, and Kakashi noticed with the aid of long familiarity that the normally boisterous jonin was fighting to remain calm and serious. I think I am going to lose my bet with Kakashi, but I have an offer between the three of us. If Naruto wins, you double your time again. If Shikamaru wins, I wear the spandex of shame for the entirety of your previous bet. Asuma looked at Kakashi and raised an eyebrow, while behind him, Guy gave an exaggerated wink to Kakashi. Sounds fair to me, said Kakashi in a bored tone of voice. Asuma turned from the group and walked away, already crowing, and in doing so, unknowingly imitating the blonde in the arena floor, move for move. Kakashi leaned slightly towards Guy and whispered, Does this mean we're going to see what you taught him, besides how to swing overly expensive swords like a novice? Guy gave a serious nod, and without a word, crossed his arms and leaned back to watch. Instead of charging, however, Naruto crossed his arms and smirked. They both waited for some time, either one moving, until a full minute had passed. I'm shocked, Naruto, Shikamaru eventually said. I've never seen you hold still for more than a few seconds. This must be a record. Naruto laughed, not some faint and socially required chuckle, but a full laugh, full of mirth. Now, I was thinking. I know you're smart as hell, Shikamaru. I also know that if you didn't trap me, I'd pummel you. And either way, this is not a deadly battle to either of us, so we have some leeway in how we fight. So how about we make this interesting? Shikamaru raised an eyebrow in surprise, then nodded. Let's hear it. Let's test your intellect versus what Guy-sensei calls my cunning. I won't bum rush you with clones or nothing. I'll set up some ground rules and limit myself to them. You'll have to figure out how to beat me, within my own self-imposed limits. No hard work, no tedious dodging, just figure it out and you'll win. How's that sound? Shikamaru snorted. It sounded like a dream come true, and like most dreams, it couldn't be real. This is a fight between shinobi, Naruto. Why would I trust you to keep your word? Naruto looked hurt at this. Have you ever seen me go back on my word, Shikamaru? Shikamaru thought very carefully on that. Naruto is troublesome, but he's also a horrible liar. He always managed to pull off some incredible pranks, only to be caught when Iruka would directly question him. He's offering to reduce his own options, without requiring any sort of guarantee from me. And if he does break his word, I'll be in no worse a position than I already am. Fine, he said, shifting from his ready stance to his customary slouch. Let's get this done and over with. Naruto grinned and pressed his hands together. In a massive puff of smoke, he summoned exactly 100 clones, who fanned out and spaced themselves evenly across the arena floor. Shikamaru was spooked at first, but every single clone kept their hands up, and many of them even turned their backs to him. Once they had settled, Naruto pulled out a storage scroll from his carryall. The scroll was quite thick, and each clone pulled out an identical scroll. Naruto raised his scroll, and with glee, he shouted to the entire arena. Now see my ultimate technique! 101 games for Bunshin to play! Every clone pulled at their scroll, and the arena filled with smoke as each one summoned an object from it. Shikamaru ducked and rolled to one side, but nobody attacked him, and the smoke dissipated quickly, to reveal chaos. Every clone was doing something different. There was no such thing as taking in every activity with a single glance. Shikamaru's eyes were first drawn to the two clones who, between them, were setting up a go board. Another clone jumped over the board, running fast as he could as he tried to keep a paper kite aloft in the windless environment of the arena. He ran by another clone who was hopping on a pogo stick, who then tripped over the pair setting up two long jump ropes, causing the clones waiting in line to grumble and complain. The noise of 100 loud-mouthed Narutos was deafening in the confined space, and all that moving orange registered as a blur of motion whenever Shikamaru's eyes lost their focus on an individual. It was chaos, pure, unfiltered chaos. Up on the balcony, Kakashi groaned and held his head in his hands while his team watched in surprised silence. What did you do? He asked nobody in particular. Guy overheard him and laughed. Tenten helped him with the scroll. I helped him get the goods he needed for the modifications, but for the most part, he did it himself. He sent hundreds of clones out each day to scrounge the junkyards and garbage cans of Konohagakure, and they managed to find and repair almost everything in the scroll, although he did need assistance with some of the more mechanical items. Guy smiled proudly, just as much as he would for his own students, because in a way, Naruto was. I didn't teach him order. He will never be the sort to perform kata and make elaborate plans, and forcing such a wonderful round peg into a square hole would be unyouthful. So I encouraged his chaos. As Shikamaru looked around, another clone walked up, this one hinged into a circus ringmaster, remarkably realistic, down to the silver-headed cane and the shining gold buttons on his red coat. He gave Shikamaru an elaborate bow. The rules are simple, said the ringmaster. Find the real me. No clone will attack you unless their playtime is disturbed. Once disturbed, they are allowed to fight, and they are shadow clones so they can hurt you. The real me is allowed to act normally. Naruto grinned at Shikamaru, and the grin did not fall from his face when Shikamaru immediately flicked a kunai at the ringleader, who vanished with a puff of smoke when hit. Damn, thought Shikamaru, I had to try. He must have swapped out during the initial clone summons. It's not that easy, came a call from the crowd behind him. Shikamaru whirled, but whoever had spoke was mixed in with that half of the milling, playing, chatty crowd. A single Naruto shouted, and a bell rang. Shikamaru turned to see one of the Narutos on a bike, a tiny little three-wheeler suitable to a kid half his age. When Shikamaru did not move from his path, the Naruto rang the little bell mounted on the handle again and glared at him. Shikamaru stepped aside. Right, sorry, he said, stepping out of the way. No problem, replied the clone cheerfully, before pedaling awkwardly, his legs moving furiously as his ride slowly crept along. Shikamaru turned to look through the crowd, and only barely heard the muffled jerk from the clone. Shikamaru sunk down into a crouch, bringing his hands up in his meditative pose as he considered his options. He looked around at the crowds, taking in what detail he could from them as he thought. All of them are completely engrossed in what they are doing, possibly to avoid the temptation to break the rules. A lot of them are also playing active games, probably in the hopes of running into me. He watched an impromptu game of tag happen between a team. One clone tripped and hit the ground hard enough to vanish. Another clone looked up from his finger paints and made the same hand sign the original had made at the beginning, and a new clone appeared in the lost one's place. By then, Shikamaru's kunai was already in flight. It pierced the sign, making Naruto in the shoulder, and he vanished with a puff of smoke. "He's on to the hand signs!" Several of the nearby clones shouted. "Activate shuffle mode!" shouted several others. Shikamaru sighed as every few seconds one or more clones would pause what they were doing and make the seal of the shadow clone technique, regardless if any clones needed replacing. "Only you would be this troublesome, Naruto," he said in annoyance. "I know, right?" said a new ringleader, walking up next to him. Shikamaru eyed the potential clone suspiciously, and it raised its hands slightly. Sorry, I got replaced a few cycles ago, and my game is to annoy the contestants. All part of the show." Shikamaru sighed and hung his head as several clones started walking on the edge of the platform railings, carrying small trays and shouting about peanuts and pretzels. It didn't help seeing the blonde girl from Suna munching on a bag of them with a malicious grin on her face, her entire bearing indicating that, as much as her match sucked, she was now certain it could have been worse, never mind watching Choji trying to snatch an entire tray from a passing clone. Sakura was laughing like a madwoman, while Sasuke seemed focused on trying to find the real Naruto first with his Sharingan. Even then Hokage seemed amused, although he was struggling valiantly not to crack a smile. One of the clones finally got their accordion tuned and started playing. Badly. The ringleader clone winced, then buffed his fingers against his jacket. "It only gets worse, you know," he said casually. "I've seen the rehearsals. It takes about 10 minutes before they get the potato gun operating. After that, it only takes a little longer before it explodes and starts disturbing playtime for others." Shikamaru's eyes widened, and the ringleader grinned. "I never said you had to disturb them, you know." Shikamaru immediately stabbed the ringleader, who was far too smug, and watched him vanish again. Shit, he thought, turning slowly in a circle. Of all the times to not have a mass attack. Just my luck. Focus. Think. How is the real Naruto any different from the clones? He started to walk through the crowds, carefully picking his way past the two playing with a frisbee, and stepping carefully over the Jack's game. He was so careful in avoiding the games of those around him, in fact, that he missed the line that had formed around a small table where two clones were arm wrestling. The moment he stepped through the line, the clone in front of him shouted, "No cuts, you jerk!" It lashed out with one of its swords, windmilling rapidly but ineffectively as Shikamaru backed up hurriedly. It was then that he discovered that the jacks the two clones were playing with were in fact small caltrops, which neatly sliced through his sandals and into his foot. As the jacks players stood and drew their swords, he dropped a smoke bomb and hinged into a clone himself, then took a seat next to a pair of clones playing checkers with an air of serious business about them. "Smooth," said one of the clones, reaching out to move a red piece forward. He sat back and much to Shikamaru's chagrin, the clone imitated his thinking pose with an annoying degree of accuracy. The previously upset clones, not seeing where their target had gone, returned back to their places and continued on as if nothing had happened. So the clones will reset, at least for the moment, if I manage to escape fully, or Naruto wants me to think that. Shikamaru felt a moment of dread settle in the pit of his stomach. He was not accustomed to assigning the possibility of Naruto's intelligence being significant to his thoughts, but under the circumstances, he realized that he could make no assumptions. He froze and looked at the clone that he spoken to him with some trepidation. "You're not going to tell me that watching is disturbing you, are you?" asked Shikamaru quietly. "No," said the clone, waving his hand quietly. "I'm okay with observers in my games." He smiled cheerfully, just as the clone across from him raised his hands in the snake seal and grinned. "That guy, on the other hand..." His words were cut off as the explosive tag under the checkers board detonated, dispelling them both and nearly hitting Shikamaru as he scrambled away. How troublesome. Shikamaru was starting to really appreciate Naruto's little game. He had no idea what may or may not anger each clone individually, up to and including looking at them. In his mind's eye, he could see Naruto dropping this against the real opponent and telling the clones to attack at will, or follow some pattern, or in order, or even whenever their foe turned their back. It was a tactic that could not be second-guessed, because it made no sense, and the only one who could know the rules for certain was the real Naruto himself. I would kill to be able to make shadow clones like he does. Shikamaru looked around and found the ringmaster wandering around casually. He waved the red jacket over and asked, "Can I ask them questions, or does that count as disturbing them?" The ringmaster shrugged. "Yeah, sure, this is a contest, so go for it." When Shikamaru gave him a look, he grinned nastily and called out to the crowd. "Uzumaki update! Shikamaru can ask you questions, and it does not count as disturbing play. Got it?" The 100 clones all shouted in agreement. Shikamaru immediately turned and walked over to the frisbee throwers, who paused to watch him. "Hey," he said casually, ready to dodge at a moment's notice in case the update rule was a trick. "Would you find it amusing to show me your hidden weapon?" The two Naruto glanced at each other, grinned, and the one furthest from Shikamaru flipped the frisbee over to show the explosive tag on the underside. "Thanks," said Shikamaru, backing away until they continued to play with each other. He then turned to the next set. Over 7 minutes, Shikamaru quickly determined that Naruto was either insane, ingenious, or most likely both. Every clone had some sort of surprise waiting for him. The pawns from the chessboard were actually cylinders of explosives, which would detonate when pressed and thrown. The kite was harmless, but the string the user held it by was ninja wire, shaved thin enough to cut. The jump ropes had explosive tags rolled on the handles. The pogo stick had a frankly terrifying spring-loaded kunai launcher built into its guts. He also saw the potato gun under construction. It took 3 clones to construct from the kit, had a 5-foot barrel, and as far as Shikamaru was concerned, when it exploded it would probably side down a third of the arena. That was a serious pressure vessel they had there, and the fact that it got inserted into the middle of the contraption did nothing to encourage its safety. Each Naruto was quite cheerful and helpful when asked, commenting that the boss wanted to encourage Shikamaru's curiosity. The potato gun operators were quite enthused, until one almost hit the valve on the pressure container and sent Shikamaru scurrying away. The one with the pogo stick was even more ecstatic at the thought of taking his toy apart to show the inner workings, and when he couldn't get it back together again, he shrugged it off and decided to join the mahjong players. It was then that Shikamaru spotted the real Naruto. He, too, was watching the mahjong players, but he was showing a great deal more interest in Shikamaru than the match. His eyes were constantly darting around, and whenever they met Shikamaru's, he would look away immediately. He was also careful to keep his hands concealed whenever a new clone was needed. "Got you," thought Shikamaru, who casually walked up to the table, pausing only to let the trike-pedaling Naruto pass him. He considered just trying to peg Naruto with a thrown kunai, but that would just lead to a normal battle, possibly including all these clones and their myriad death traps. "Excuse me," he said politely. "If I snatch away your observer, would that ruin your fun?" The Narutos gathered around the board all shook their head, except for the real Naruto, who nodded vigorously and started to sweat. Shikamaru made his family hand seal and silently sent his shadow out. It lanced immediately to Naruto's shadow, and against his will, Naruto slowly stood and matched Shikamaru's pose. Shikamaru grinned as the trike's bell rang behind him, and he stepped forward slightly to get out of its path. He reached up, miming the action of drawing a sword over his shoulder, and across from him, Naruto, who did have a sword, drew one as well. "Give up, Naruto," said Shikamaru, raising his hand near his throat and watching Naruto raise his blade in the same pose. "I caught you." He felt a chill go down his spine as 2 swords were draped almost casually around his neck from behind, and Naruto leaned in as if giving him a comradely hug. "No," said Naruto quietly. "You didn't. Give up, Shikamaru. I doubt you can undo that technique fast enough to win." Shikamaru looked around, weighing his options, then dropped his arms and released his technique. "Beaten by the dead last of my year," he grumbled, although he had no real rancor in his voice. He sighed and looked at the ceiling. "I'm never going to live this down," he said before raising his head and calling out clearly. "I yield, Proctor." The clones let out a loud cheer, pumping their fists in the air, before dispelling in a cloud of smoke, leaving only the Naruto that Shikamaru had caught with his shadow standing. The real Naruto rubbed the back of his neck, a big grin on his face, and said, "Phew, that was close, Shikamaru. If you hadn't disturbed that clone earlier." "That was a clone?" Shikamaru sighed and slumped slightly. "Which clone was it that got me? I thought I took care of all the ones I dis." His words wound down slowly as the realization stole over him. That damn tricycle rider! I interrupted him in his path and disturbed his playtime, but he never did anything. Naruto let out a giggle. "I watched him slowly trail you for the entire match, pedaling madly the entire time, waiting for a good shot. I was kinda proud of the little guy, actually." Shikamaru shrugged and gave Naruto a small smile. It's okay, you did me a favor anyhow. Chunin would be too troublesome for me. Naruto took Guy's traditional nice guy pose number 1 with thumb extended. Don't worry, Shikamaru, when I become Hokage, I'll put you to good use. You can be in charge of mission selection, that's a nice and easy job. Believe it! He didn't notice the scowl on Shikamaru's face, nor the grin on the Hokage's face, when he said that. His mind was far too occupied celebrating his victory. Up on the walkways, there was a lot of murmuring and laughter going on, although Choji was grumbling bitterly when the food vanished, and Asuma was groaning while Kurenai explained that, according to the rules, he was going to be off his cigarettes for 4 months instead of 3. A stunned Kakashi, who had just watched Naruto trick a Nara in a battle of wits, reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a thin real coin. He tossed it to Guy, who caught it without looking at it or letting the grin leave his face. Chapter 30, The Final Match. Hinata's Fate. Naruto climbed the last step to his teammates still beaming from his win. The moment he saw their grinning faces, he let out a whoop and raced towards them, getting a return whoop from Sakura and a quiet laugh from Sasuke and Kakashi. He was shocked when Sakura picked him up bodily and gave him a hug. Sure, it was obviously a friend hug, not a friend hug, but it felt good nonetheless, and he returned it cheerfully. When she set him back down, he found Sasuke standing there, fist out. That was a good fight, Dobe, he said, with a degree of sincerity that Naruto had never heard from the Uchiha. He bumped fists with Sasuke, giving him an even wider grin. Thanks, team. Sasuke's eyes sparkled with mirth at the cheerful and insolent insult. Man, what a good day I'm having, he thought. My team kicked butt, we're all heading for the finals, and I nailed Shikamaru so good in a fight. I'll be dreaming about the look on Shika's face when that clone had caught him unawares for months. Naruto turned when he heard the sound of Akamaru barking loudly and looked at the board. His eyes lit up as he saw the names. Inuzuka Kiba and Akimichi Choji. Kiba was already on the floor, grinning and standing in his tough guy pose. The fluffy-edged gray jacket did little to help his tough guy persona. Neither did Akamaru, his little puppy companion, who was flopped over his head like some sort of boneless puppy hat, yipping every few seconds and wagging his tail. Choji did not look nearly as enthused. He had decided to take the stair, and even as he made his way to the center of the arena he continued to munch rapidly on a bag of potato chips. Compared to the muscular and strident Kiba, Choji looked like a chubby, dumpy little boy wearing his dad's oversized clothing, but the way he was eating had an almost rodent-like ferocity to it. Kiba's got this in the bag, said Sakura cheerfully as she leaned over the railing to watch. Behind her, Naruto gave Sasuke a cheesy grin and rubbed his forefinger and thumb together and nodded at Sakura. Sasuke got the message, and while he wasn't sure about the odds, Naruto of all people should be good at spotting long-shot winners. Why not? If you're so sure about that, said Sasuke, leaning over to match Sakura's pose exactly. Maybe you want to bet on it? I think Choji might have a chance. Sakura looked at him, eyebrows raised in surprise. What's the terms? Sasuke opened his mouth, then closed it. What the hell could they bet? Neither one of them was swimming in cash, and neither one of them was poor, so money had no special value. And as far as he knew, there was nothing he wanted from her, or her from him. In the end, he shrugged. What terms do you want? She grinned with far too many teeth at that. Ino would kill me if I used that opening to press for a date, and so would you, I think. Sasuke frowned, and she gave him a playful wink. Instead, let's bet on what we both will want soon. Time. Time? Asked Naruto. Sakura nodded. We're all going to be training like crazy until the finals. We'll need all the time we can get. So until the finals, loser does the winner's housework. All the cleaning and shit we have to do to keep our homes operating reasonably. I win, and Sasuke does the household chores I am normally given by my parents. Sasuke wins, and I have to clean his house, or whatever it is he does with his home. Sasuke only needed a moment to think about it, but it seemed like a good deal to him, if he won. He had a small apartment on the edge of the old Uchiha compound, a small thing that served as a place to eat and sleep when not training. He was fairly orderly, but not insanely so. If he won, she'd have some work to do, but not a particularly onerous amount, and he'd have that much more time to practice. If he won. His eyes flickered slightly in Naruto's direction, and the boy shot him a discreet thumbs up. Deal, he said, settling down to watch while Sakura grinned like a bandit. Down on the floor, Hate had an arm out as he prepared to start the fight. He asked Kiba if the boy was ready, and he gave a lazy stretch. Yeah, I guess if Chubby here is ready to get his ass beat, I'm ready too. Hate looked at Choji and was about to speak, when he heard the voice of the orange genin, Naruto, calling out from the side. Hey Choji! He shouted cheerfully. Did Kiba just call you fat? A few feet away, Shikamaru ran a hand over his face, partially to hide a grin. He'd been trying to figure out how to gracefully get his friend worked up, but sometimes the most graceless of people can be effective too. Hate looked at Choji, slightly confused, just in time to see the bag of chips explode in the boy's hand as he made a fist. Start the match, he said, his face going red. Hate nodded and lifted his hand. Begin! Kiba was ready to shout back at Naruto for putting words in his mouth, but he was suddenly too busy. Choji inflated into a perfectly spherical shape, his limbs and head hidden within, and began spinning. Kiba had seen this transformation before, but seeing it chasing down an enemy was quite different from seeing it from the front end. Kiba threw himself to the side, allowing Akamaru to jump away as well, and he heard the pavement crunching on the floor as Choji passed. Kiba stood and dusted himself off, watching as Choji made a wide turn and raced back at him. This time, Kiba dodged in a more timely fashion, watching carefully as Choji tried and failed to veer in his direction. Easy win, Kiba thought fairly. Fine. You wanna play ball? He dropped to all fours, flooding his body with chakra and using it to force his nail to grow into sharp talons. We're good at it. He whistled, and Akamaru jumped over to join him, landing on his back and yipping. Let's do it, Akamaru! Human beast clone! With a puff of smoke, Akamaru turned into an exact copy of Kiba, down to the feral claws on his hands. With matching snarls, both lunged into the attack. Choji chose one to focus on, rolling as fast as he could, but even as he did so, the other hit him from the side, sending the human ball bouncing and tumbling across the arena. One of the Kiba let out a howling laugh, then turned to the other and said, Akamaru, fetch! The other clone nodded and chased after the clone, moving at an incredible speed for a genin, although not as fast as Lee could. He dashed past Choji, then turned and delivered another strike, sending the spinning back to Kiba. For almost a minute, Kiba kept pounding on Choji, knocking him back and forth between them. With each hit, the ball would reorient at them, pushing to gain control, but with each hit, the two Kiba would change position and strike him on the side again. Eventually, the real Kiba noticed that his companion across the way was starting to pant heavily. Akamaru does not have nearly the chakra I do, he thought, and I'd hate to disable him with a soldier pill just to win such an easy match. He waited for Akamaru to kick Choji back, then shouted, Let's wrap this up, buddy! Akamaru jumped over to Kiba with a yip, and they both watched Choji finally gain control and roll, with a slightly wobbly path, right at them. Let's go! Shouted Kiba. Fong passing Fong! The two Kibas started spinning at a ferocious rate, forming two powerful whirlwinds of claws and strength. They both hit the rolling Choji dead on, sending all of their kinetic energy into the impact. Choji flew away from them at incredible speed, and Kiba started to crow. Then he hit the arena wall, dead on, and the spinning orb of Choji's body deformed briefly into a spinning ellipse under the pressure of the comparatively immobile object, the spin pulling him up the wall slightly on impact. Doing so angled the resulting crater upward as well, resulting in a very, very short barrel of wall aiming down directly at Kiba. Then the compression forced on Choji's body by the impact, reversed by the impact with the wall, sent him sailing at Kiba at nearly the same speed as he'd left. Most of his spinning inertia had been killed with the wall impact, leaving him as just a large round projectile heavy enough to crush pavement moving at a speed it would not normally be able to move with even the hardest of effort. He hit both Kiba, which, combined, had far less than half the mass of Choji, and almost no inertia at all. Both Kiba received the sudden dose of gifted kinetic energy with the time-honored tradition of accelerating rapidly away. Unfortunately, with their much lower mass, that energy was more than sufficient to send them flying into the opposing wall with a tremendous thud. It was sheer luck that Choji was aimed directly between them, thus hitting at an angle and sending them back at that same angle. It was also sheer luck that their combined masses did not variate Choji's own trajectory significantly. The happy result of this luck was that, despite being in no condition to move, they nonetheless avoided the impact of Choji hitting the wall and coming to a very sudden and very final stop. After a few seconds of silence, Choji pulled himself out of the crater in the wall, his legs wobbling. And up in the stands, Sasuke smirked at Sakura, who was glaring at him with surprising fury for such a small bet. Sucker, he said, eliciting a laugh from Naruto. Up in the stands, only 3 people did not smile or laugh or joke about the fight. All 3 were fully focused on the match announcing board. Neji stared with bored disinterest. Between his own talents, and the techniques Kakashi had taught him, he knew he would be the victor. It was simply impossible for him to fail against the remaining foes. He would win. It was fated. Hinata stared with nervous tension. She knew she was hardly the strongest shinobi there, and she also knew that Neji and I Neji-san was a possible opponent, and he might possibly be the strongest, although Hinata was beginning to wonder about that after seeing Naruto's team fight. And her other possible opponent was well experienced, even if he had not passed the exam before. Kabuto stared at the board with a mask of anxiety plastered on his face as his mind raced. He had strict orders to follow, as his time in Konohagakure slowly ran to an end. Against Neji, under those constraints, he might end up losing in a fair fight if he limited himself. But how the hell could he possibly make his loss look good against the nervous little girl Hyuga? Finally, the last match popped up, and Neji got an ugly look on his face as he snarled. Tenten looked at him nervously, having only rarely seen him express emotions. She hesitantly reached out and gave him a pat on the back. "It's okay, Neji, none of this counts until the finals." He shrugged off her hand with an angry flick. "I don't want to get into the finals without a fight," he growled, his voice low. Then his anger faded, to be replaced by a cold, cruel smirk. "Still, at least I get the pleasure of watching my cousin fall to the weakest genin I have ever met besides her." "Last match," said Hate, coughing into a balled fist. "Hyuga Hinata Kabuto, please come down." When Hinata saw the board light up with her name, she was almost ready to faint. She had been quite close as it was when she realized she might face Neji on the arena floor, and the relief of not having that task before her kept her moving, even as she advanced down the aisle to take the stairs. She saw Naruto ahead, talking rapidly with Sakura-san and Kakashi sensei. Her heart pounded in her chest, her ears filled with the sound of her own blood rushing, and she did her best to keep moving forward and ignore everything but her next footstep. Then Naruto saw her approaching and turned to face her fully, with a big cheerful grin on his face. She froze, terrified, as a single horrifying thought landed in her mind and flashed behind her eyes. "I am going to lose in front of Naruto-kun, and he'll never respect me." She bit back the tears that threatened to escape and gave him a timid, shaky smile. He stepped forward and held out a fist. "You kicked my ass so many times during training. I'm sure you're gonna kick his ass just as hard. If you have to, pretend he's one of my clones and smack him around. You can do it, Hinata!" He still stood there, a little awkwardly, fist out and waiting for her to return the gesture. Sakura leaned in and whispered something in Naruto's ear, and he suddenly brightened. "Hey, good idea, Sakura-chan. Hinata, fight as hard as you can, and when it's over, we'll go get some ramen, my treat. Win or lose, just do your best." A date. With Naruto. For just a moment, her eyes lit up slightly, then dimmed again. He wouldn't call it a date. Just him and the loser, hanging about. She nodded timidly to acknowledge his offer and moved to pass by Team 7. Naruto turned to follow her, slightly confused, his fists slowly dropping unacknowledged. Kakashi leaned down and whispered in Naruto's ear, and in his rush to give his apparently bummed friend a boost, Naruto didn't even stop to think as he repeated. "Win, and we'll call it a date. Wait, what?" Naruto turned to glare at Kakashi, who nodded in Hinata's direction. Naruto turned and realized that Hinata had stopped moving completely, not even breathing. He looked at Kakashi again, and the man gave another nod in her direction while giving him what could only be called a death glare. Naruto was confused, so he shrugged to himself and followed Kakashi's lead. He'd done right by his sensei before, after all. "Yeah," he said, trying his best to sound cheerful in spite of his confusion. "Yeah, we'll call it a date. So go kick his ass, Hinata-chan." After a moment, without any sort of acknowledgement, she started to move again, her steps even more shaky. Naruto turned to Kakashi and quietly whispered, "Are you sure about this, Kakashi? She looks even more demoralized now." Kakashi smirked under his mask and gave his cute, stupid little genin a pat on the head. "Trust me." Kabuto watched his foe approach and suppressed a sigh. The timid little thing was walking out, head down and index fingers pressing rapidly against one another. Cute and all, but it does me no good if she passes out with a single blow. His mind raced as he considered his options. He did have a few medicinal preparations he could try, but most of them would have harmful side effects, either physical or mental, and he was not supposed to cripple anyone here. "Are you ready?" asked Hate. Kabuto gave a distracted nod. Hate glanced at the girl, who gave a tiny nod. "Begin." And Kabuto suddenly felt much more enthused about his problem, because his opponent ran to get at him. He knew a lot about the famed Juken martial arts practiced by the Hyuga. With a single touch, a proper Juken strike could close down a chakra coil completely for a long period of time. Without chakra, most shinobi were unable to operate at all, never mind in combat. Juken could also be used to directly attack the organs in the target, bypassing skin and bone to directly slice into the chakra that infused the organs of every living thing, which could easily destroy those organs. Both of these were good cause for concern, now that his foe seemed motivated. The girl lashed out at him viciously, bringing her arms around in long arcs and attacking him from various directions, trying to hit with even the lightest tap. He spun and dodged where he could, and where he could not, he deflected her hands carefully, making certain not to let her fingertips touch him. Jukin was difficult to defend against for that very reason, and Kabuto found himself hard-pressed to avoid every attack. Then he raised his arm to deflect another strike, only for the girl to abandon the initial attack and drop to the floor, scything her leg at his own. What the hell, he thought, that's not a Jukin move. Kabuto jumped, easily avoiding the slightly awkward leg sweep, and felt like slapping himself in the face when the girl remained close to the ground and started trying to tap his legs while he was still in the air. With no ability to deflect or dodge in the middle of his jump, he did the only thing he could do and started shifting his legs randomly before each tap. She got in 6 fluid, rapid taps before he hit the ground. When he landed, he threw himself away from her as hard as he could, rolling into a crouch well out of her reach and hissing in pain. He had managed to prevent her from striking his chakra coils, which would have taken his legs out completely, but halfway through her attack, she had noticed his defense and switched to the less precise organ-damaging blows. They were not terribly effective on muscle tissue, but they did have an effect, and his legs burned horribly as he stood up from his crouch. He saw her, panting hard but arms up and ready, and favored her with a smile. "I guess I'll have to take you seriously, Hyuga-san," he said cheerfully. A blue glow began to infuse his hands as he formed his chakra scalpels. They weren't nearly as precise as the Jukin, but they could cut flesh and bone, and would allow him to make the fight look less one-sided for the observers. This time he pressed the attack, charging forward with a much more direct and graceless style, barely any better than the academy form for little kids. She tried to parry his first attack, then swiftly pulled her arm back when he flexed his fingers and tried to tap her arm. After that near miss, she started fully evading instead, twisting and turning with every blow he tried to strike. In this, her tiny little girl body aided her immensely, as did her own natural agility. But no defense is perfect, and Kabuto finally spotted an opening. He lunged, plunging his fingers from above into her shoulder. He could have simply cut the muscles without any outward sign of injury, but he wanted to make an impression, so he cut through the skin as well. His fingers went deep, breaking her clavicle and almost severing her supraspinatus. Then his hand stopped, both by the remains of her broken shoulder and by the small hand wrapped around his wrist. The girl looked up at him, even as she grimaced in pain and clamped down harder on his arm, using the leverage of her grip to push his hand hard against her injury to trap it. Then she smiled, and quietly said, "You are in range of my divination." Kabuto fought back a smile of his own. Perfect. Then pain happened. The 8 trigrams 64 palms maneuver, a core technique of the main branch Jukin of the Hyuga family, was designed to knock an opponent back, keeping them off balance as the Jukin user systematically closed the major chakra coils of their opponent. Unfortunately, the technique also required 2 hands and an opponent that is not being held in place. Hinata could never complete the entire form as she and her foe were positioned. So she settled for shutting down only the half of Kabuto's body she could easily reach instead. She released his hand with the final blow, shoving him back as hard as she could. Normally, between his greater mass and her own high agility, low strength build, it would have done little, but with Kabuto's entire left side immobilized, he stumbled and fell into a graceless roll. Then the elation she felt over her seeming success fell apart as her shoulder screamed in pain. She grabbed her arm and sank to the floor, fighting the urge to scream. She heard her opponent start to chuckle and lifted her head enough to see that he was managing to pull himself up carefully. "You got me good," he said, taking a single wobbling step before slumping to the ground. With a grunt, he began the process again. "But I lost one side, and you lost the other." He fell over again, and started to crawl slowly towards her. "In a trade of 1 for 1, I think I'll win. I'm more used to the pain, little girl." Hinata's eyes started to water, and she leaned over, holding her throbbing arm. It seared with a sort of icy heat, a pain so extreme it passed through pain itself and became something more, some non-pain that hurt more in her heart than her body. She slumped to the ground, then struggled to sit back up against the overwhelming suffering. "He's half down and crawling, Hinata-chan! Finish him off!" She could hear Naruto shouting at her, although it felt like he was across a vast canyon from her, distant and invisible. But still watching. "He's watching." She rolled onto her back with a pained grunt. "He's cheering." She sat up, sending new shards of non-pain through her shoulder as her back muscles pulled at it. "He wants me to win." She wedged one foot under herself, and leaning forward, managed to get into a crouch, then straightened. Across from her, Kabuto was also crouched, his one arm dangling, the other arm sheathed in blue. He was smiling, but sweat was dripping down his face. All I have to do is cripple your other arm, and I'll win. If it comes to it, I have the strength to kick you unconscious with one leg alone. Hinata took a deep breath and prepared herself. It'll be worth it, she told herself. She then moved back into her normal stance, with one arm hanging limp. That would be true, she panted through the pain. But I still have two arms. She reached over with her good arm and pulled the damaged one up until her undamaged muscles elsewhere in her shoulder could take over the movement. The agony made light flash in front of her eyes. Her shoulder became a ball of suffering as her broken bones were ground together, and as the last of her supraspinatus snapped. But slowly, surely, her arm rose, even if it did tremble as it did so. The movement is limited, she thought to herself as she grit her teeth to keep herself from yelling, because if my arm goes too down or back, I will need to lift it with the other arm again. The only advantage she had in this case was that she could still channel chakra, and thus, a touch from her damaged arm could still hurt her foe. Kabuto looked up at her, panting, his face disbelieving. Then he smiled, and Hinata felt for a moment that smile was a little too cheerful for someone in his condition. He let his dead leg sag and rolled onto his back. I give up. She obviously wants to win more than I do right now, thank you. He let out a bitter laugh that sounded a little forced to Hinata, then a cough. Maybe next year. Hinata managed to hear Naruto's whoop before she fell to the ground. There will be a 1-month break, said Hate, as those who had passed and were able to move stood before him. Between here and the final round. In this time, you will have an opportunity to heal and train to prepare yourself. Your matches will be decided now, before you leave. The board behind them began to flicker as it displayed the matches. Sakura and Tenten grinned at each other as their names showed up. Sasuke smirked at Kankuro, who gave him a stiff nod. Gaara did not react, which did little to calm Misumi's nerves. Naruto gave a thumbs up to Choji, who smiled back. And Neji smiled grimly when Hinata's name showed next to his own. I can't wait to see you all next month, said the Hokage. You're dismissed. As soon as he got home, Neji went to his room and laid down in his bed. While he had not needed to fight in the preliminaries, the week before had been long and uncomfortable, and all he wanted was some rest. It was for that reason that he was deeply unamused when Hatake Kakashi opened his window and climbed in. You shouldn't walk in uninvited, Neji said without preamble. Especially not into a clan's holding. Does anyone even know you are here? Kakashi waved off Neji's objection as if it was irrelevant. Your cousin will be in the hospital for a few days while the medics heal the broken bone, he said. Good, said Neji, without inflection. Your uncle is there too, of course. Good, Neji repeated, although this time he could not stop a little rancor from coloring his tone. Maybe you should talk to them. Maybe you should go read your book. Neji turned away from the window. He heard Kakashi sigh, then a rustle of cloth as he slipped into the room and quietly took a seat at Neji's writing desk. I meant somewhere else, he grumbled. He looked at Kakashi, who was sitting in the chair, slumped over to get his face near Neji's. Neji, recall for me the options we discussed regarding your clipped wings. He said this in a near whisper. Neji sighed and closed his eyes, trying to remember their quiet conversations when Kakashi was training him. Assassinate the Seal Masters. Assassinate the clan head. Foment rebellion. Petition Hokage for manumission and see if Jiraiya can help. Challenge Heishi to a battle for my freedom. Hold the clan head and his heirs hostage. And you're missing none from the list? None of the options we discussed? Neji frowned, and re-examined the list in his head. After a moment, he grunted a negative. This is why you will never succeed. Neji sat up quickly and glared at Kakashi, who stared back at him with the same mask of apathy he gave everyone. That apathy did nothing to calm Neji. If anything, it inflamed him. Fine, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Tell me, oh wise one, what did I miss? Kakashi shrugged. Political support. Neji rolled his eyes. Really? You act like the main branch loves having you under the yoke. You treat them like they are a nameless mass, just one big foe to wrestle with and defeat. You treat them like faceless peons. Just like you feel they treat you. Surely you see the irony in that thought? Neji crossed his arms and only glared harder. Kakashi shrugged, then smoothly stood up and made for the window. If I were you, he said as he stuck one leg out, I would go talk to them and figure out how they feel. It might very well be that they're on your side, in which case you gain allies. And if not, well, you'll know to plan around them instead. Kakashi jumped away, leaving Neji glowering at his empty room. Neji-san? Why are you here? Neji walked over to one of the chairs next to Hinata's bed and sat, glaring down at her, if only to keep from glaring at her father, his uncle, the one who ordered his father's death. He took a deep breath, and let his face settle into a stern look. You are aware we are matched against one another in the finals? Hinata nodded. I want to know if you will use my seal against me when I crush you. He stared hard at Hinata, watching her face carefully. He expected a sudden hot denial from her, or a sheepish stuttering mess that told him nothing. He did not expect her to look him in the eye and say, no, with a touch of horror in her voice. He activated his Byakugan to focus that much harder on her. Why not? He said in the same imperious tone. It would be wrong. Wrong to win in such a low way? Hinata shook her head, and a tear rolled down her face. Wrong to use it at all. Hayashi looked at Neji, his face as carefully schooled as always. Why do you believe this of us, Neji? Why do you think we are seeking an excuse to use the caged bird seal against you? Neji could not keep the bitterness from his voice, nor the hate from his face, as he turned to Hayashi. You've done it before, he said. Hayashi sighed and hung his head, and for a moment, his mask of Hyuga decorum and calm fell. Neji expected an angry, bitter face, but all he saw was a tired old man. Neji, he said heavily, I understand your burden. I understand your anger. Yes, I did use the curse seal on you. Once. As was required by me. This does not mean I enjoy it. It does not mean I want it. I am forced by my place to follow the traditions of our clan, regardless of my own desires. He frowned and looked at Neji, and the boy was struck by the weight behind his uncle's gaze. In your words, it is my fate, and one that is not particularly kind, I think. Don't speak to me about fate, said Neji coldly. Those fated to live through the murder of another have no right to speak of fate as if it is something to be suffered. Hayashi sighed deeply. This is about your father, is it not, Neji? Always. I will never forget. Hayashi reached into his robe and pulled out a small scroll. The scroll was old and worn, the edges run ragged by constant handling. Hayashi looked down at it, his hands clenching it tight. I don't know why, but I was never able to give this to you. Even now, a part of me wants me to hold on to it still. It's the last testament of my brother, the last thing he did before he died, and I never wanted to let it go. He smiled at the scroll, a grim little smile. In a way, my own greed for his last words may have cost his son his future. Hayashi stood and placed the scroll on Hinata's bed, then turned his chair to face them both as Neji started to read it. The boy's face flickered as he did so, his eyes barely moving, his face twitching as he struggled between bewilderment, anger, and sadness. Finally, he set down the scroll and turned to his uncle, with a strange light in his eye. Tell me the story, he said simply. Neji stood, his mind jumbled. He looked at Hayashi, kneeling with his head pressed to the floor, begging forgiveness for something he wasn't even responsible for. He gave his uncle a short bow, at a loss as to what else to do, and began to walk towards the door. Wait, Neji-san. Neji stopped and turned to look at Hinata. Her eyes were red, and her hospital gown was dotted with her tears. Neji felt touched that she cared enough to cry when even he could not. The curse seal ends with me, she said quietly but firmly, her fingers wadding up her blanket. I cannot and will not abide by it. I will not have my sister branded for no reason but that she is younger than me. I will not have your children branded because of the misfortune of their birth. And I will not have anyone branded with the excuse of sealing away their Byakugan in death while main house members operate freely as shinobi, exposed to the same dangers and yet expected to somehow be immune to misfortune. She said all this in an even tone, as if her words were to be engraved and posted in great metal sheets over every home in the clan, and Neji was astounded that his weak, stuttering cousin could even manage the words, never mind the tone of certainty. She turned to her father, who had lifted his head, but remained kneeling. I must train for the finals, she said, her voice a careful monotone, as if reading from a script. We know I have not succeeded in the past under your guidance. I shall need a new teacher. One that is strong, and has proven their worth. She spared a glance at Neji, as did Hayashi. Unfortunately, my trainer must know enough to train me. So he, too, must be trained. Hayashi looked thoughtful for a moment, his eyes unfocused, then he gave a short, thin smile and stood. His own voice took the same singular tone as he said, Not knowing who you may choose to teach you, I nonetheless feel that it is wise to accept any choice you make on those terms, to ensure your continued growth and safety as heir. I make an oath that I shall train someone who is strong enough to then teach you, when you find them. Have you found such a teacher yet? Hyuga Neji, son of Hyuga Hizashi. I am shocked and appalled. Hayashi's voice did not change from his monotone, but his eyes crinkled slightly as he held back a smile. However, as a man of my word, I cannot refuse an oath. He turned to Neji and gave a short bow. Hyuga Neji, you have been appointed my daughter's personal trainer. To ensure the success of your duties, I will be personally training you in the main branch form of the Jukin. Report tomorrow at dawn to begin your future duties. Neji narrowed his eyes. Can you even do this? He asked skeptically. Do what? Asked Hisashi in the same dull tone. I have made an oath before 3 witnesses. I would never abandon my honor or oath, as all Hyuga know. My daughter is obviously much smarter than I give her credit for. Shame on me for letting her fool me. Still, at least she has a good grasp of political bargaining. 3. Neji turned and did a very undignified jump when he saw Kakashi sitting on a chair in the corner, face still in his book. Yo, he said casually in greeting, before flipping a page and giggling. This will change nothing, said Neji with a frown. This will change everything, said Hayashi, standing from the floor, returning to his normal voice. In my time there was never a powerful example of the equal strength of the branch house to show the elders. Already others think of you as a prodigy in both houses. In due time, with your example as a visual aid for those who might oppose her, Hinata may very well be able to change our people. He gave a short bow to Neji, a formal one, and then rose. Will you accept this new duty, Neji, son of Hisashi? Neji paused to look at Hinata, who was beaming at him, then to Kakashi, who gave him a thumbs up without looking. Finally, he turned and gave a short bow to Hayashi, lower than the one he had been given, as befit his status. Yes, Hayashi-sensei. Chapter 31. The teachers arrive. Train us. Naruto did not walk out of the forest of death and into Konoha proper with his team. He strutted, head held high. From time to time, he'd pause to flex at the occasional passing shinobi, and much to his surprise and amusement, several of them laughed and returned the pose, or just gave him a high five. He still got the occasional glare from civilian passerby, and more than a few of those who did not cheer him on looked at him like he was mad, but it was worth it. Sakura made no effort to pretend the situation wasn't funny. She laughed along, and more than a few times, those who chose to flex back at Naruto would turn to her and do the same, which she returned with a cheerful smile and good graces. Many of the passing shinobi, those not drawn into Naruto's antics, gave her a respectful nod as they passed by, or a thumbs up. Shinobi gossiped like an old wives' club when matters were not classified, and Sakura was delighted to find out from one of them that the tape of her match was already starting to spread. She was even more delighted when she heard that Iruka was planning on showing his copy to every graduating class as an example of seeing underneath the underneath. Sasuke smiled easily during this walk. He did not need the approval or support of passerby, but he also did not feel the urge to take that goodwill from his teammates. The dead last and one of the most useless fangirls from the academy had both made it into the finals, right alongside of him, and he felt more than a little pride in their shared accomplishment. The respectful nods he got from the more serious shinobi and civilians were certainly pleasant enough. Naruto was leading them all in a completely unsubtle manner towards Ichiraku Ramen, already thinking about his upcoming month of training, and ramen, when he heard a whistle behind him. He and the others turned to look at Kakashi, standing behind them with a cheerful and yet solemn air. You 3 have done incredibly during this exam, he said, his one eye looking at each of them in turn. The last time 3 rookie genin from the same squad made it to the finals of their first exam was when the Sannin took their test. In the end, all 3 were promoted, and at this rate I suspect you 3 will be too, and this time without a war to justify it. To know I even had a part in such a group is humbling. You had a big part in it, Kakashi-sensei, said Sakura, beaming. Without Kakashi's efforts in training them with other genin, who knows what sort of kunoichi she would have become. She had needed the kick in the pants she got from tussling with Kiba, and she doubted she would have gotten it from her teammates. She would have cheered Sasuke on as he crushed her, and rejected Naruto every time he tried to help, she was sure. She idly reached up to her shoulder to scratch at Kiri's chest and thanked whatever guided their lives that things had worked out the way they had. Without you, this team would not be as strong, and neither would I, said Sasuke with a slightly brittle smile. Each day was a painful reminder for Sasuke, not of what he needed to do, but what he'd almost done. Before his team, his friends, he was always alone, even in a crowd of fellow students. He had been so focused, so dedicated to his revenge, that he had no thoughts to spare beyond it. Yeah, reading that pervy book while we trained must have been hard, said Naruto, who grinned until Sakura gave him a smack in the back of the head. He rubbed his neck sheepishly and gave a more restrained smile. Really, Kakashi-sensei, you helped a lot. Kakashi had changed his life. The blonde was the first to admit he was not as smart as many of his classmates, including Sakura, and maybe, on a generous day, maybe even Sasuke. Kakashi hadn't accepted that from him. Kakashi had poked, and prodded, and encouraged, anything it took to find what worked, and when he found someone who could make Naruto stronger, he sent Naruto off to train without hesitation, even if it was his youthful rival. Kakashi could have let Naruto coast along like most of his academy teachers had, but instead he taught, and when Naruto didn't get it, he tried a different angle, until eventually, even Naruto understood. Kakashi gave a giggle and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Ma, you're too kind, you three. Too bad I'm not training you this month. He froze under the sudden glares from his students, and raised his hands defensively. It wouldn't be fair to you three if I trained all of you a third of the time, or one of you the entire time. He backed up as the three started advancing towards with a slow and menacing strength to their step. Even Naruto had stopped focusing on his next meal and was cracking his knuckles. Besides, he said, trying to sound as cheerful as possible, all three of you have had volunteers to train you for the finals. That drew a pause, and the three genin stopped advancing and settled for staring at him. I had 3 people approach me, separately, in the time it took for me to get here. All 3 offered to train one of you, and all 3 were good matches for the one they asked for. I didn't want to play favorites, so I figured I'd let you train with someone more suited to your individual strengths. They should be coming to get you sometime in the next day or so try not to wander too far off the beaten path, okay? When they nodded in acknowledgement, he gave them each a pat on the head, even going through the trouble of actually landing that pat on Sasuke's head as the boy dodged, then vanished with a swirl of leaves and smoke. Right, said Naruto, draping an arm across Sakura's shoulders, then removing it when she cracked her knuckles. How about some ramen? We'll probably be super busy, so we won't get to meet up much. Sasuke and Sakura both shrugged and grumbled. Ichiraku ramen was good, but not all day every day good for them. Naruto grinned and pulled out his small frog-shaped wallet. He popped open its clasped mouth and wiggled it back and forth as if it was talking. How about I pay for it? He said in a high falsetto. I've become so fat from all the money I've been able to save. Help me lose some weight. Sakura chuckled, but Sasuke happened to glance into the frog wallet's mouth. His eyes widened, and he took a step back. Tell me that thing's not filled with explosive notes, he said in horror. Not full of them. Just some extras. I saw the roll, Naruto. Naruto laughed, although the laugh had a brittle edge to it. Hey, you saw my fight in the arena, right? Who on earth keeps all of their surprises in one easy-to-steal scroll? He looked down at the wallet, and his smile took on a frightful intensity. Sakura gave Sasuke a light punch on the arm. Come on, she said. I'm sure he knows how to not set off an explosive tag. Let's get a meal together. Sasuke gave a deep sigh, then stopped and looked up the road a little. When he didn't speak, his teammates turned and looked as well. I think I'll have to pass on that, Sakura, Naruto. My trainer just showed up. Standing just a few feet away was a man, standing with his arms crossed. He wore a dark gray bodysuit with a high collar, covered with a long hooded jacket in a brilliant white. A large gourd was strapped to his back, but he carried it without the slightest hunch, just as Gaara had. A pair of sunglasses, pressed close to his face, concealed his eyes and gave him an ominous appearance. Aburaim Shibi, Shino's father and the pride of the Aburaim clan, nodded once to Sasuke and turned to walk away. Sasuke waved to his teammates, then followed, lengthening his strides to catch up to the taller man. Naruto turned to Sakura, hoping to turn their team meal into a date, but Kiri suddenly gave a loud meow and butted heads with Sakura, who frowned. Damn, she said, rubbing Kiri's head hurriedly. I forgot, I tossed Kiri's food before the test in case it went bad. I need to stop by Dan's place and restock. She noticed Naruto's look of defeat and gave him a smile. Maybe we can meet up the day before, for a completely not a date meal? Naruto moped a little, but eventually, like the sun coming out from behind the clouds, his grin returned. Yeah, not a date. This time. Sakura swatted him gently, then waved as she ran up the nearest wall to cross the town. Naruto waved goodbye in return, and with at least some good cheer still remaining, he turned and entered the Ichiraku ramen stand. Tucci and Ayam were behind the counter, but for once, their faces did not light up on Naruto's arrival. They were both far too focused on their other guests, Tucci with anger and Ayam with disgust. Their only other customer was tall man, well into the middle of his life, with a thick and unkempt mane of snow-white hair flowing down almost to the floor. The man wore a Konoha forehead protector, but it was oddly built, with a much wider band of metal and 2 miniature horns pointing out of it. His otherwise sensible dull green clothing was hampered by the long red vest he wore over it. He looked like a joke shinobi, and like many real shinobi, Naruto did not care to be represented as a joke. The worst part, though, was the leer on the man's face. He was looking at Ayam like Naruto looked at ramen, and some inner core of Naruto rebelled at the idea of looking at his big sister figure in such a way. So, the man said, leaning forward and resting his head in both of his hands in a manner that was both casual-looking and forced. How does that sound? I could even get a part for you in my next book. A starring role, even. His eyebrows did a little dance, and when the old man began to make a kissing face, Naruto finally snapped. He put on a cheerful grin and walked up. Excuse me, mister. Can you help me with something? The man looked down at Naruto, and there was a slight moment, a flash of something Naruto could not identify, before the old man's face fell into a contemptible sneer. Go away, kid, you're messing up my pattern, he mumbled. Naruto held up his frog wallet. Can you look at Gamachan for me? His insides are broke, and maybe you can fix them? Please? Naruto mentally gagged to himself as he said the last in a childish lisp, but his grin never faltered. He saw the same something pass through the man's visage, as if he was trying to hold down some sort of reflexive reaction, before he sighed and took the wallet. I'm great with kids, you know, he said, pausing to leer at Ayam again. He then popped open Gamachan's mouth. He chuckled a little at the wad of bills in it as he hefted it in his hand a few times. There was a lot of money in there, months of saving after Kakashi had helped Naruto with his money problems, and a few other surprises as well. Naruto knew the exact moment when the old man spotted the roll of explosive tags. His chuckle froze, and his eyes flicked up to Naruto, who had placed his hands in the snake seal as soon as the old man looked at Ayam. Can't blow up my ramen stand, but he doesn't know that, thought Naruto smugly. Let's see you handle that. Then the old man grinned. Naruto looked up at the small, Gamachan-sized hole in the ceiling, his mouth agape. A few random bills could be seen floating on a breeze, following the arc his wallet had made as it sailed into the sunset. Ah, that had my rent in it, he said with a disgusted sigh. He turned to the old man, who was looking at the hole with a smile of amusement and satisfaction across his face. Wow, he said with an easy smile. That thing must have been heavy, to fly that far. I think it cleared the village walls. Naruto let out a frustrated grumble and ran a hand through his hair. Who the hell are you? He asked, his voice slightly petulant. You who are pissing off my favorite people? You who threw my wallet out of the city? He moaned and thumped his head on the countertop. And why are you dressed like a joke shinobi? Joke? Naruto looked up from the counter to see the odd old man crouching on one of the stools, looking for all the world like a giant, ugly toad. Joke! The man stood up on the bar stool, one foot on the stool, one on the bar itself, where he took a dramatic pose, carefully ignoring Tuchi's efforts to smash his foot with a small wooden mallet. Do you not know who you are talking to, kid? Naruto shook his head. The old man began to hop on the one leg on the bar stool, his other leg raised for balance, one arm thrust forward dramatically. As he did this, the stool slowly began to rotate, spinning him in a slow circle as he did his dance. Open your eyes and get an eyeful. From north to east, from south to west. Women want me, men want to be me, and everyone fears me. For I am Jiraiya the Great Toad Hermit. The spinning barstool stopped as Jiraiya came around to face Naruto, a wild and cheerful grin on his face. Then Ayam hit him with the biggest frying pan she had been able to find. Sasuke stopped when they reached the central pillar in the Aburame clan compound. They had stopped by the shared project room in the central hall, where Shino had wordlessly joined them. Sasuke had removed his usual equipment when instructed, storing it in one of the lockers he and Shino had installed to keep the more dangerous materials safely. The two Aburame had then nodded to him and immediately walked out of the room to the central pillar, where Sasuke stopped. I am not permitted, Sasuke said, giving a polite bow. The Aburame had been quite clear on the matter in the past, and Sasuke had no desire to aggravate his trainer before they even begun. Shibi returned the bow. You are permitted to enter, with escort. Why? Because the best way to train you is within our family hive, and we would not train you if we thought you were unworthy. He straightened, and without another word, he and Shino both entered the enclosed stairwell. Without hesitation, Sasuke entered. The stairwell wound down, spiraling around the outer wall of the shaft, and leaving a large empty space in the center. There was little light, and as they started to walk into the depths, Sasuke saw Shino and his father pocket their sunglasses. The stairs were rock slabs, individually built out of the walls, and each one was remarkably thin. He looked upward, and saw that those stairs continued up past the entrance, all the way up until the very top, which had some oddly patterned stonework supported by several thick stone supports. It took a few moments, but Sasuke eventually recognized the pattern as that of the central square of the miniature village above. The entire square. Sasuke immediately realized the intent of the structure and approved. Living underground, immediate access to the surface in an emergency might be a problem. They had built a large central shaft, then capped it with a plug of stone that could be collapsed with little effort. The thin stairs would snap easily under the weight of the falling stone, creating a wide and clear corridor to the surface that any shinobi could climb. In a real emergency, if they needed all hands to the surface, blowing that cap down would surprise any foes, during which the Aburame and their insects could swarm out and envelope them. Impressive. Practical. Very Aburame. The stairs ended well before the shaft did, at a hole dug into the stone and wide enough for several people to stand. The hole was roughly dug, but had been worn smooth by the passage of time and people. 2 Aburames stood at attention just inside the hole, and when Sasuke approached, he could hear their internal hives humming in agitation. But the guards simply nodded to him, and he continued to follow his guides. It took some time to get used to how the Aburame built their home system, carved as it was out of the surrounding rock. Aside from places where gravity was required, there seemed to be no adherence to it. Passages would split up or down as often as side to side, and those who he saw stood at whatever orientation they happened to come out at. Several times, he saw a few clan members pause and talk, both craning their heads up to see the other person. Sasuke wondered how younger children handled traversing their homes, until he saw a pack of them scurrying by using small handholds carved into the walls and ceilings and floors. A few shops and stores were found at this level, almost exclusively catering to shinobi needs, but for the most part, every doorway and window he saw, regardless of orientation, looked into a home of some sort. Those that were not level seemed to curve on the inside until they were, but some rooms even had furniture set up to hold occupants against gravity. In one particular case, he had walked over a window and looked down to see an older female laying in a reclining chair, carefully bolted to the floor by its back so she could sit without using chakra. She had waved at him in a friendly enough manner, and caught off guard, he waved back before moving on. Eventually, they reached the end of their trip, arriving at a very elaborate and hefty metal door. It had several clear windows built into it, and through it, he could see another identical door on the other side, beyond which was bright light and several Aburame working at desks on paperwork. Shibi nodded to one side, to a less elaborate door, and Sasuke entered to find a round table with half a dozen chairs within. Shibi and Shino waved at a chair, and Sasuke sat. To his surprise, they both started to remove their coats, something he had never seen before. In the dim light, he could make out very little, but he could clearly see the small holes in their arms where their insects could enter and leave their bodies. They sat, and while either one smiled, both looked oddly at ease, even with the unaccustomed loss of their jackets. "All you have seen here is a clan secret," said Shibi without preamble or small talk, in a monotone almost identical to Shino's. "While these secrets are neither dangerous nor deeply important, we, the Aburame clan, ask that you keep them to yourself. Nobody, not even the Hokage, has the right to demand this knowledge from you." Sasuke nodded without hesitation. Without any idea what was within this hive-like structure, any invader would find it almost impossible to work effectively when they made their move, and would be ripe for ambush. Giving away anything on the way this place was built could very well compromise that advantage. Shibi nodded back. "We, the Aburame clan, have had a meeting to discuss this possibility. It was agreed, in mere hours, to offer it to you. Why? Because you are almost singular amongst Konoha shinobi in your respect and understanding of our allies, and we have a need for your assistance. This will be exchanged for training and acceptance as an honorary member of the Aburame hive, if you agree." "What do you need, Aburame-sama?" asked Sasuke. Shino was the one to speak next, leaning forward slightly as he did so. "We host our Kakashi in our bodies, almost from birth. Our hives grow with us, just as any other part of us. This is excellent for our clan jutsu, but it also has a penalty, in that almost all Aburame have a hive. This means that we have few people without a hive with which to test the results of our breeding experiments. Generally, we only get people who marry into the clan, or willingly join for other reasons, and both such are quite uncommon for our unconventional hive. Inserting a new hive into a host with an old one can be dangerous. Between interbreeding and possible biological incompatibility, the old hive can easily become corrupted or destroyed, which has a disastrous effect on a full-fledged Aburame." Shino frowned slightly. "It would be like losing your eyes, the complete removal of a sense that you have lived with all your life, and now had to do without. Thus, we are careful in our efforts. That is why we had those elaborate airlocks leading beyond this point. Those are only to the report desks. Further in, far more complex systems are used to keep the various hives separate and safe, just in case." Sasuke found himself both put off by the Aburame's sense of logic and straight talk and feeling grateful for it. Normally, one did not pose a direct question to another in any but the most informal setting out of concern for being seen as rude. The Abirame had no such qualms. You wish me to take on a hive? Sasuke asked. Both Shibi and Shino nodded, and Shibi spoke. We have developed a promising strain of Kikaichu, one that may prove to be a great benefit to our clan in the future. But before we risk a child, it would be best to test it on someone who can communicate fully. Why? If a child cannot express themselves, they cannot warn us if something is wrong with their hive or them. Sasuke sat back and thought. The idea made a great deal of sense, viewed through the lens of cold Abirame logic. Choose a willing host who will not have compatibility issues, implant the new strain of Kikaichu, and see what happens. The idea of insects crawling through his body was creepy as hell, but that's what people always said about the Abirame themselves, without ever getting to know them. What does it feel like, Shino? To have a hive within you? Shino blinked, and Sasuke realized that his friend had never expected a question like that from Sasuke. After a moment, Shino smiled tentatively. It feels like a friend running a finger down your arm in greeting, only done many, many times at once, at all times. It is a constant reminder that the hive lives, as do you, and with the hive, you are never truly alone. It was Sasuke's turn to blink. He had expected a cold, clinical description of the sensation, and instead had gotten as close to sappy as he had ever seen from his friend. He took a deep breath and thought carefully about the situation, considering what else he would need to know. The Abirame would likely not fault him for thinking carefully on the offer, and would probably not feel insulted if her refused, all the more so for logical reasons. Sasuke had time to think, and he knew it. For almost 5 minutes, he mentally catalogued everything he thought he might need to know, while Shino and Shibi both waited patiently and silently. Finally, he started to ask questions. What are the risk factors? Less than 2% probability of long-term bodily harm, and less than 0.1% of deadly risk, said Shibi. We will teach you how to locate and neutralize the queen of your hive should you ever feel in danger. The process of receiving your queen and the creation of your Kikaichu paths is unpleasant, but not permanently harmful in itself. This species is not significantly different from the previous one, only more robust and efficient in its use of chakra from the host. At this point, we are 98% certain the species is safe to use, but we Abirame prefer to get as close to 100% as feasible. And the benefits? Shino looked at his father, then at Sasuke. That depends on you. Kikaichu feed on chakra. They are also symbiotic, and will not take more from you than you offer. The more you offer, the faster and stronger the hive grows, and the further it will spread throughout your body. Initially, your hive will be limited. You will be able to drain small amounts of chakra from foes, and plant tracking bugs on them, but many of the more combative techniques of the clan may not be available to you for some time, depending on how much you permit the hive to grow. You mentioned honorary clan membership. Does this require me to renounce my clan, join your clan, or otherwise limit my freedom of choice when it comes to family matters? No, said Shibi. We would welcome you into our clan, if you desired, but Shino has strongly pressed us to not make that offer, as you wish to revive your clan in the future. As an honorary member, we expect and demand nothing from you. Why? Because we would not offer if you were not worthy of kinship, even informally. Sasuke thought a moment more, then blushed slightly when he realized he had another important, if uncomfortable, question. This will not impact my reproductive capabilities. Shibi shook his head, and Sasuke thought he saw the man smother a small smile. No, he said. The Kikaichu will avoid the relevant areas of your body. Socially, there may be consequences. Outsiders often look down on us as abnormal. We cannot promise your mating options will not decline because of this. But you will remain biologically capable. Should you be unable to find a mate, the Abirame would be willing to find a compatible one from amongst our ranks, to ensure that goal is met. Shino must have seen Sasuke's face, because he was quick to comment. We Abirame do not see the world as you do. For us, the social protocols of love are largely stripped away for the practicalities of raising our young in a healthy and effective manner. His face softened slightly. We are not inhuman. We have emotions. Many of our people find love in our own way, and should we need to find you a mate, feel assured she will not be unwilling in the matter. But for us, emotions are born in logic, not in spite of it. She would love you because you were her husband and the eventual father of her children, rather than something so shallow as appearance or reputation. Shino smiled slightly. In school, out of all your fellow classmates, I may have been one of the few who truly appreciated how you suffered at the hands of your fangirls, although I will not pretend I did not find it amusing as well. Sasuke closed his eyes and considered his choices. He had been presented with a rare honor, that he knew, but he pushed that little bit of pride away. He was slightly disturbed by the idea of a living hive within him as well, and that was much harder to push away, but he did so. He looked at the cold logic, cost and benefit, but in the end, his fear and pride kept pushing in, distracting him from what he needed to think. He could not put aside his emotions like Shino. Of course, I know exactly where to get an impartial and logical opinion. Shino, he said, his eyes still closed. You know of my long-term goals. What is your recommendation? Shino needed very little time to think. If you take the hive, he said, you gain some unique capabilities, ones your foes may not expect. If the hive works out, you benefit. If the hive does not work out, all you have lost is the chakra you fed them during the initial stages and some slight scarring where your pathway exits were located, either of which would be detrimental to your goals. You have little concern about the social stigma of having a hive, and neither of your teammates seem to fear me, so they should react with a neutral or possibly favorable tone. I am of the opinion that you lose nothing to take the hive, and stand to gain if it works. Sasuke smiled in the dark. Such a Shino answer. I agree, and consent to receive a hive and training amongst your clan. As Sakura neared Dan's shop, she saw the older man standing on a small stool, placing large wooden shutters over his window. The bench he usually kept outside already missing. As she approached, Sakura peeked through one of the still open windows and saw that his shelves were empty of perishables, the coolers clean and powered down. Dan? She asked apprehensively. What happened to the shop? Everything okay? Dan turned at her and gave her a broad smile. When he turned, she could see that under his normal apron and work pants, he was wearing a lightweight and loose workout suit instead of his usual civilian attire. Things are wonderful. He stepped down from the stool and swept Sakura into a surprisingly solid hug. I saw the tape already. Kakashi made sure a copy floated my way. He hurriedly set the last of the shutters over his window, then waved Sakura into the shop. Once inside, Dan dragged over the bench, as well as a small plastic cooler. He opened it and pulled out a few cuts of meat for Kiri, as well as a Western-style sandwich for himself and Sakura. Sakura accepted the meal eagerly, her first real meal since the exam started, and the three of them spent several minutes in companionable silence as they ate. Dan finished first, then excused himself and wandered into the back. By the time Sakura finished, Dan was walking back into the room with a large backpack held in his arms. I have a gift for you, he said, holding out the pack. The pack was an ancient thing made of leather, poorly cared for and cracking wherever it wasn't rotting. Instead of the design Sakura was used to, with an opening on the top, the entire back of it was laced up around its contents. It was also large, nearly the size of Sakura's torso, and just as thick. She set the awkward bag on the floor and pried the old leather ties loose, eventually resorting to cutting a few of them. She unwrapped the leather to reveal a large scroll that filled nearly the entire bag, as well as a small leather pouch like the one she carried on her hip. Dan's smile dulled a little when she looked up at him, and he waved at the scroll. She unrolled it slightly on the floor. On the very edge of the scroll, written in an archaic script, could be seen the words, "Only those who ask with sincerity may gain our aid. Only those who serve with sincerity may earn our trust." After that was a series of thin vertical boxes. The first 7 were filled with writing in a form Sakura did not recognize, followed by a series of handprints in blood. The 8th was the same, except this box was legible. Written within it was the name, Fukui Daniel, and another set of prints, this set smeared from the tips all the way down to the near end of the scroll. Every square afterwards was blank. Dan kneeled in front of the scroll with a tired grunt, the first time Sakura had ever seen him sit without a chair, and he touched the scroll with reverence. I came from a distant land across the great ocean to the east when I was a mere child. My parents did not survive the crossing, and I was discarded by the crew when the ship arrived at port. I survived a meager existence on scraps and garbage. Begging was useless, my foreign nature was not appreciated in that town. It was a dirty and desperate way to live, but I still found one shining reason to keep moving each day, and that was my friend, Mironiko. Miro was an ally cat like me, and when we first met, I'll admit, I tried to catch and eat him. He evaded me for a full day, dragging me across the town and back again, and every time I thought I had him cornered, he escaped again. Eventually, I gave up and sat in the dirt to try and drown the rumbling of my stomach with a good cry. But Miro came back, and brought with him a loaf of bread, pilfered so skillfully from a baker that I half suspect they never found out. Dan let out a happy sigh. Those became golden days for me. Miro helped me get food, find shelter, watched over me in my sleep to ensure my safety. I did the same for him, and in the process, learned about stealth and secrecy, how to spot foes before they spotted me, and how to lash out wildly when cornered, until none would try to harm me anymore. Sakura waited, but Dan had gone quiet, head down, and although his lips moved, no sound was being made. Dan? Are you okay? She asked. When he didn't react, she laid a hand gently on his arm. Dan lifted his head again, and unshed tears brightened his eyes. Sorry, he said, his smile growing again. I often miss those days, wild and free and irresponsible. But like all things, they too had to end. His smile shrunk slightly, but did not fade completely. Moreau was an old cat by the time I met him. In the few years I was with him, he went from an athletic if aging cat to an ancient and thin creature. Eventually, he grew tired and sickly. It took me a full day to find him, curled up in a hidey hole he'd never shown me, an old and closed-off sewer. I guess he was too tired to leave the place. When I found him, he dragged himself up and wobbled over to one corner of the old sewer. I followed him, and saw him pawing weakly at this scroll, propped against the wall. I picked it up, opened it, saw what had been done with it. I asked him if I should do as they had, sign my name and make my mark. Moreau grunted, and I did so. The moment I made the last fingerprint, Moreau let out a single purr, just the lightest little sound, and quietly died. Sakura rubbed her eyes as Dan started to cry quietly. Eventually, Kiri wandered over and curled up next to Dan, purring quietly. That seemed to break his sorrow a little, and he ran a hand gently along the cat's back. I came from a land without knowledge of shinobi or summoning contracts. I didn't even know what chakra was. Thankfully, the Nico summoning contract is different from others of the sort. When someone new signs it, one of their kind is notified, and if no contact is forthcoming, they use a reverse summoning to discover what has happened. They were not pleased on my arrival. He laughed, and a bit of his previous good cheer returned to his voice. Moreau had been tasked with finding a new summoner when the old one died, but he was not exactly a conformist. He wasn't happy with any of the shinobi he met, and eventually gravitated to the civilian town where he found me. They trained me for more than 10 years, and I still hate every single day of it. His smile was warm, even as he said that, and Sakura suspected he enjoyed it more than he let on, like an old war veteran who told warm stories about friends who had died. So why are you not a shinobi, Dan? Dan shook his head and waved his arms down at himself. I am what I am. When not literally starving, I tend to be slightly overweight and doughy. Not to mention slow. And lazy. Sakura giggled slightly at his honest appraisal, and he laughed in return. I'm not shinobi material, and frankly, the lifestyle scares me. I didn't think I'd handle life and death situations all that well, and after 10 years, the elders of the Naniko agreed fully. So instead, they sent me out to one of the largest shinobi villages in the world to find a new summoner. Dan reached out and nudged the scroll closer to Sakura, who frowned. Are you sure this is a good idea? She asked with a frown on her face. Hell, how will they feel about Kiri? Would they be angry I already have an ally? Kiri looked up at Dan with possibly the smuggest face a cat could have, which is impressive, because almost all cats are very good at that face. She then clawed Dan on the leg, making him jump up and curse. All right, he shouted. I'm getting there. He turned to Sakura and pointed at Kiri. Where do you think Kiri came from? An oddly intelligent kitten who just happens to show up one day in the Inuzuka compound? Long odds on that. I actually figured one of them would go for it, but you took on the responsibility to train her, and even if you did fumble along a bit, you turned out all right in the end. Sakura looked at Kiri, who gave a surprisingly human nod. She then gave a short bow to Kiri and rose with a smile. I am honored. I will gladly sign the Nico's summoning contract. Dan handed her a pen, and she wrote her full name in the next square down the row. She then pulled out a kunai, nicked one of her fingers, and used the blood to press each print to the paper. She finished, and Dan smiled at her. I'll make sure Kiri remembers to summon you in a month, he said cheerfully, giving her a wave. Sakura was about to ask what he meant when the reverse summon technique hit, and she vanished with a puff of smoke. We punched the training log with full force, each blow making the solid wood target shudder. Guy was right there with him, matching blow for blow, occasionally bellowing out some advice or encouragement. Neji was busy with his clan, formalizing his role as Hinata's teacher, as well as receiving training from Hayashi-sama. When they left the preliminary, Neji had seemed off, unusual, but not in a bad way. He didn't scowl when Lee congratulated him again for reaching the finals, nor did he talk about his fate, or Lee's fate as a loser, which was abnormal enough that Lee and Tenten had looked at each other and fallen silent. They had walked together a little way, and when it came time to part ways, Neji had said goodbye, but he also gave them a small smile, a tiny little uptick of the lips that had Lee burning with youth, and Tenten too, considering how red her face got. And Neji had promised Lee a spar later, after he got settled with everything that had happened. Win or lose, it is truly a wonderful day to be alive, because my rival had acknowledged him, and now, I must train that much harder to ensure I am a worthy foe. Lee laughed as he began to move faster, forcing Guy to speed up as well to keep the rhythm. Guy laughed as well. Tenten had not joined them in their training. Guy had roped in another jonin, a man named Ebisu, to train Tenten. Lee had been worried at first when he saw Ebisu-san's cold face, and after the trainer left with Tenten, Lee had asked Guy about it. Lee, said Guy, his face serious. We burn with the fires of youth. It is in our nature. But not all men and women are the same in that matter. Some must burn, but some must be cold and critical, serious, dour. It is no shame for them to be so, should such a mood serve to keep them motivated, and Ebisu is one such man. He is an elite trainer, a master of many of the core techniques we shinobi often use, and a natural choice for Tenten now that she is branching out slightly from her focus on weapons. Trust in me, Lee, and trust in him. Tenten will show the world her own youth soon enough. It said much about Lee that those mere words were enough to change his mind, to allow him to respect Ebisu-sama to train Tenten well. And as he continued to strike the post, his mind turned to Neji, and he began to wonder what motivated his eternal rival. Lee heard someone approaching him from behind, slowly and hesitantly, and stopped his exercise to turn and greet whoever it was. What he saw was a blonde girl around Sakura's age, dressed in a simple dark blue jumpsuit, bowing deeply on the ground. Her hair was carefully pinned up in a tight bun behind her head, arranged to be difficult to move, and her ears had clearly once had piercings, now removed. The girl raised her head, and Lee realized he recognized her. Yamanaka-san? He asked. She nodded carefully, then flinched when Lee cheered and rushed over to pick her up off the ground. Yamanaka-san, I wanted to congratulate you on your youthful fight. I was quite impressed that you defeated such a worthy and dangerous foe. Guy laid a hand on her shoulder, and when she looked up at him, his smile was gentle and friendly. I was more impressed with your words after your fight, as I know Hokage-sama was. It was a good decision to make, and a credit to your serious intent. He waved the two of them over to a tree, where the two of them had laid their packs. He pulled out 3 canteens of water and handed one to each of the genin before taking a deep draught for himself. I have a guess why you are here, Yamanaka-san, but please speak freely. We are not complicated people, Lee and I, and value honest and direct statements over elaborate wordplay. Lee nodded, his face so serious and earnest that it brought a smile to Ino's own lips. I want you to train me, she said, looking squarely at Lee. Sakura suggested it after the forest. She suggested that from what she had seen, and from what she had heard from Naruto, you are a genius of hard work, and I think that's what I need. She sighed, but managed to keep smiling. Hard work is not my family's way. Because of our clan's techniques, we tend to end up in torture and interrogation, and I doubt I will be any different. As such, we rarely focus on abilities outside of our clan's specialty. But I want to be a capable kunoichi, and right now I am not. I need work, hard work, and you're the one to provide it. Of course, said Lee cheerfully. I am sure Guy-sensei will be glad to help you. Guy coughed in his fist and smiled. She was talking to you, Lee. Lee looked at his sensei, confused, then shook his head and looked at Ino as if she were mad. I am not a teacher. I am a mere student. It would be better for all if Yamanaka-san were to train under you, Guy-sensei. It was Ino who denied that claim. Lee, I am not anywhere near the same level as you two are. In order to train me, Guy-sama would have to reduce your own training to a very small level indeed. But you could easily give me guidance, having come from a position of weakness and made it into strength, and while I may never catch up to your level, I would still want to try. Further, with such low-key training compared to what you usually do, it could easily be used as a cool-down period for your own training without disrupting your own growth. Guy nodded along to Ino's reasoning. He had been worried about that himself, and while he knew Lee to be a kind-hearted boy and would gladly make the sacrifice of time and training to help this young lady, it would curtail his own efforts, and he would soon have grown bored with the level of training that such a physically weak person would need. Lee, I think you should accept, said Guy, in his most serious tone and face. It will give you a chance to learn how to teach, from a willing and receptive ally. He rested his hands on Lee's shoulders, and for a moment, marveled at how the boy had grown over the years, how tall and strong he was. It brought a manly tear to his eye. I will not be a teacher forever, Lee, and when that day comes, you will need to pass what you know to some other young person with the fires of youth. Now is a good chance to train yourself to be a teacher as well as a fighter. Lee looked thoughtful for a moment, his eyes narrowing in thought. But he nodded, his eyes starting to gleam with inner fire, and turned to Ino. YOSH! He shouted, causing Ino to flinch slightly at the volume. I shall train you to be a genius of hard work, like myself and Guy-sensei. And if I cannot... He paused. What challenge could ever top that, the failure of being unable to teach? Nothing could compare. And if I cannot, he continued, I will do so anyhow. I will continue to teach you, until our very deaths. One way or another, you will become strong like us. He turned to his sensei, his eyes gleaming with determination, then to Ino, who looked hopeful at his declaration, and gave them both a number 34 nice guy pose with thumbs up and extra tooth sparkle with a hand-painted background. I will never stop trying. That is my shinobi code. Lee, I am so proud of you. Guy swept Lee into a manly hug. Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. There was a pause. Then Lee turned to Ino, with unshed manly tears in his eyes. Ino-san! He shouted, with just as much enthusiasm, his arms open. Ino began to sigh in mild distaste, then stopped herself. Old Ino valued appearances, even when there was nobody to judge. Old Ino also failed completely as a kunoichi. Maybe new Ino should give it a try. Ah, what the hell? She finally said. It works for you too. Lee! And she permitted what she soon realized was not some delicate, potentially romantic hug, but a rib-crushing, back-aching mauling. It was not a mere hug, it was a test of strength, as she would soon discover all things were when Lee and Guy had the power of youth coursing through them. Ino-san! Lee! She gasped weakly, trying to breath. Ino-san! Lee! She barely whispered, as her vision started to fade. Ino-san!